10th, 2022 afternoon work session of the Portland City Council. This is related to the budget. So welcome to my colleagues and welcome to our citizen budget advisors. I'm sure this will be a busy and interesting afternoon. I look forward to the discussion. And with that, I will turn this over to Director Kennard. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Mayor, members of the Council, and community budget advisors. We are here today to have a budget work session on community safety and key issues related to community safety. I will pause and see if before we get started today, if there are any questions or announcements before I turn it over to Director Mike Myers. All right, hearing none, we can go ahead and get started. I will turn it over to our Community Safety Transitions Director. Director Selby, do you have a question?
Yeah, I was wondering if I could just give a quick equity and inclusion reminder for everyone.
Absolutely.
Great. Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Director Kennard. I'm Jeff Selby. I use he, him pronouns. I'm the interim director for the Office of Equity and Human Rights. And as we start our session, I just want to share a couple of reminders for equity and inclusion. As you introduce yourselves today, when you're giving your presentations, please share your pronouns if you're comfortable doing so. As city employees, it shows that we value safe, inclusive spaces for people of any gender, and that gender can't be assumed based on appearance, voice, or name. And the practice creates a safer, more inclusive environment for transgender and non-binary people. And also, as you guide us through your presentations today, please describe any photos or graphics on your slides so those who are blind or have low vision can engage with your presentation in a more meaningful way. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Selby, for that reminder. With that, and I will say, I know we have two separate but related presentations on community safety today, and there will be a break in between, I believe. So for folks to know that we're not powering through 3 hours all at once again. With that, I will turn it over to Community Safety Transitions Director Mike Myers.
All right. Thank you, Director Kennard. Well, good afternoon, everybody, and good afternoon, Mayor and Council. For the record, my name is Mike Myers. I am the Community Safety Transition Director for the City of Portland. I want to start off before I get into the regular part of the presentation and simply express my thanks to the Council, both Mayor, you, and the Commissioners for your support this year. As you know, we started this division as brand new and started April of last year. And I wanted to thank all of you for your support and your patience with both the team and myself as we've navigated through some very difficult situations for our community, and also starting a brand new division at the same time. Equally, I think it's important that I thank the community safety and public safety bureaus themselves, the directors and the chiefs. This hasn't been easy for them. This transition is obviously new. We've did a lot of trust building over this year, but I also want to thank them for their support and their patience. And as always, Director Kennard, I want to thank you and your team for the professionalism and the leadership that's always shown during the budget process, and we appreciate your guidance and support also. As most of you know, the Community Safety Transition Director position and the Division of Community Safety started back well before 2019 with the Public Safety Work Group. This was an opportunity to bring all of the community safety groups together and start talking about what it would look like to have a more streamlined, more strategic approach to community safety and break down those silos that we've had built for the history of our time together in Portland. And this has been quite the project. And as I go through the slides today, the presentation, I'm hoping that you'll see the hard work that's been put together, the cooperation, the collaboration that I believe you were expecting when you asked us to start doing this work. I think it'll be on display. And then, of course, just kind of the theme that we have today to tell us a couple of stories of our successes. So I'll get started. So the first, I'd like to start off with talking about where we're going. One holistic system that works together to keep communities safe. But we're not quite there yet. We are in transition, and transitions are often messy, even in the best of times. And I think we can all agree that we are not in the best of times. Amid this transition, our city has been experiencing unprecedented community safety challenges. This is our story. We are acting with urgency to address the crises before us. At the same time, we are doing the work of innovation to re-envision and create new community safety system that will be more responsive, more equitable, and more efficient. These are two Herculean tasks that we are tackling at the same time. During this work session, we will outline for you our current efforts and what we need from you in order to continue moving these efforts forward. We know that funding is not unlimited, and you have many requests to consider. But we also know how important it is for Portlanders and residents of any city to feel safe. We ask that you consider our requests in light of how critical community safety is in our city at this time. Community safety and our system map. Who are the players in community safety arena? We all know the four public safety bureaus have critical roles to play. The Bureau of Emergency Communication in answering and dispatching calls, to the Portland Police Bureau and Portland Fire and Rescue, and PBEM in mitigating, planning for, and responding to public emergencies. Additionally, the Mayor's Office of Violence Prevention has been working at the community level for almost 2 decades now to interrupt violence and serve those most affected by violence. As we reimagine community safety as a city, we have acknowledged that there are also other programs and bureaus that play critical roles in keeping communities safe. The Portland Bureau of Transportation, Parks and Rec, 311, Portland Street Response, Community Health Assess and Treat teams, and public safety support specialists are all contributing to community safety in innovative ways. You will hear about the work of each of these bureaus, offices, and programs today. What we want to emphasize here is the centering of community in the community safety system map. We are striving to improve the safety of our communities in Portland, and we are ultimately accountable to them. Let's talk a little bit about our agenda today. So following the brief introduction, we will spend the next 80 minutes of our time together talking about how community safety partners are acting with urgency and what we need to address unprecedented community safety challenges. We have a 40-minute presentation for you, followed by 40 minutes of discussion and a question and answer. After a 10-minute break, we will reconvene to talk about revisioning community safety and what we need to continue the groundbreaking work of transforming our system. We will have another 40-minute presentation for you, followed by another 40 minutes of discussion and Q&A. So I would ask, if possible, if you could hold your questions until we get to the question and answer sessions. I will make sure that I touch base with each of you so you have an opportunity to comment and ask questions. I do have Lisa Freeman, who is working on the behind the scenes to make sure that she's monitoring the chat and watching for raised hands if you have to break in. And I also want to thank Julian Massenberg for operating the slides today. He put most of this presentation together. Julian, thank you. So let's start off with acting with urgency, addressing unprecedented community safety challenges. The context is unprecedented challenges. First, we are dealing with major external influences outside of our control. The COVID pandemic persists. We are still dealing with public health crisis, which has also had severe impacts on the economy and caused social isolation and mental health crises that have had severe impacts on community safety. The accelerating effects of climate change are amplifying seasonal weather impacts and creating increased fire risk in the urban wildland interface. Coupled with the city's housing crisis, this extreme heat, cold, and smoke is causing hazards that will likely continue to increase in frequency and severity. These influences have led to an enormous increase in community needs for both emergency and non-emergency services. The pandemic has led to increasing medical emergencies and demand on health services, including record drug usage and overdoses, and increased demand for behavioral health services. We are in the midst of a gun violence crisis with a record number of homicides in 2021, over a 300% increase over 2019, and the trend continuing into 2022, with disproportionately impacts on BIPOC and houseless communities. We have also seen increases in other crime, from vandalism, car theft, to break-ins at both local businesses and city facilities. One survey of businesses reported that nearly 2/3 had broken into or vandalized in at least 18 months, and 1 in 6 businesses having experienced this 5 or more times in the same time period. 2021 also brought us record traffic deaths and pedestrian deaths, many of whom were people experiencing houselessness. On top of all of this, we are experiencing increased urban wildfires and wildland interface fires as a result of climate change. These multiple crises have resulted in a 20 to 45% increase in weekly 911 calls and has increased wait times that frustrate residents in crises and have made the news on multiple occasions. All of these challenges strain our first responder systems and staff, resulting in increased demands for service at the same time as staffing levels and morale have dropped. Our staff, worn thin and struggling to keep up with demand. Staff wellness and morale are suffering. Increased departures put greater demand on recruitment and training staff. This not only impacts emergency responders, but everyone working in the public realm. Portland Police Bureau sworn staff, specifically the police officer rank, are at their lowest numbers in 20 years, while facing numerous retirements this summer, with nearly 10% of the sworn workforce becoming eligible for retirement. For more than 2 years, Portland firefighters have been the all-hazard responder for a confluence of unprecedented demands, including pandemic medical calls, wildland fires in our region, the city's houseless crisis, transport the city's shelters during inclement weather, and hazardous air quality events. In totality, this has taken a real toll on Portland Fire and Rescue members' mental health and emotional health and well-being, and impacted Bureau morale. Over the last 20 years, Portland Fire and Rescue staffing numbers have remained static, with retirements and departures accelerating, while the city's population has grown by 23%. The Bureau of Emergency Communication has had numerous operations employees retire, resign, or take leave of absence due to burnout and the introduction of new technologies, leaving 109 call takers to manage nearly 1 million emergency and non-emergency calls each year. In the past 2 years, PBEM has responded to more declared disaster than in the previous 10 years, including increased demand for community shelters, with just a staff of 20 people. This combination of unprecedented challenges and reduced staffing level puts our community safety system in an untenable position without additional resources. But still, we are responding. I'd like to now turn this over to Director Bob Causey to talk about how the Bureau of Emergency Communication is currently acting with urgency. Director Causey?
Thank you, Director Myers, and good afternoon, Mayor, Commissioners, Community Budget Advisors, and colleagues. I'm Bob Causey, the Director of the Bureau of Emergency Communications. I use he, him pronouns, and thank you for this opportunity to discuss BOEC's budget needs. Since 2019, 911 calls to BOEC have increased by an average of 22%. Looking at trends as we head into this summer, data is pointing toward a 37% increase in 911 calls. Calls are not slowing down, they're increasing. This has resulted in very lengthy wait times averaging over a minute and often exceeding 2 minutes, sometimes as long as 15 minutes for a 911 caller to wait on hold during their worst day. We've experienced a number of retirements, resignations, and absences due to the stress placed on our employees. BOEC dispatchers are literally the most skilled and talented in the business, and I'm very proud of the work that they do every day. Their heroic actions usually go unnoticed to the casual observer, and we can't afford to lose any more of them. We've met with numerous community organizations and boards, and as the 911 answering point for all of Multnomah County, we clearly hear the concerns expressed by our community regarding the service that we've been providing. This past September, we received a joint letter from county and city elected leaders, including the cities of Fairview, Gresham, Maywood Park, Troutdale, and Wood Village. They too, along with our Portland community members, need and deserve and should expect better 911 service. As a Bureau, we're addressing this problem in 2 ways, the first of which is emerging technologies. 2 of our 3 technology solutions are on track for implementation by Memorial Day this year. The first is the Automated Secure Alarm Protocol, which will allow various alarm companies to notify us of alarm calls via direct computer interface rather than by telephone call, freeing up BOEC call takers to answer 911. The second is the Automated Abandoned Callback solution, which uses technology to automatically call back anyone who calls 911 and hangs up. Many of these calls are accidental or pocket dials, or oftentimes duplicate calls for high-profile incidents like shootings or traffic accidents. This callback feature automatically confirms with the caller if an emergency exists, and helps BOEC call takers who would otherwise have to manually call each 911 hang-up back. 911 hang-up calls make up around 20% of the 911 workload. The third technology solution is Case Service, which uses artificial intelligence technology to better manage non-emergency calls. This technology creates pathways and guides callers to the right information or location, such as 311, other bureaus, other agencies, or BOEC's non-emergency lines, depending on the needs of the caller. Case Service is slated for implementation by July 1st and will be beta tested through the end of the calendar year. Along the lines of technology, BOEC is also assisting the 311 program by providing guidance and information in how to migrate non-emergency calls and referral calls to 311. The 311 program will be presenting their information a little bit later during this discussion. Without the technology components that I just mentioned, BOEC would need an additional 40 dispatch employees. But anticipating that the technology will have a positive impact, our request for staffing can be significantly lower. Our budget request this year includes 10 permanently funded dispatch positions to help us better respond to community calls for help. We're also seeking 3 limited term dispatch positions to help build a training pipeline to stay ahead of attrition. We also need resources to help us leverage the quality assurance components of the new medical and fire triage system called ProQA, which was implemented last spring. In this request, we're seeking 2 quality assurance analysts to provide internal training and call taker support, along with 2 supervisory positions with a focus on bureau-wide training. I recognize that this is a hefty request, but I also have to acknowledge that our 911 system has been faced with insurmountable challenges. We all want to do our jobs well. We have the tools. Now we need the people to be able to accomplish that. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Causey. I would like to now turn this over to Director Nike Grain on how the Office of Violence Prevention is currently acting with urgency. Director Grain.
Thank you, Director Myers. Good afternoon, City Council. My name is Nike Green. I am the Director of the Office of Violence Prevention, and my pronouns are she, her, hers. So there is no community safety without community trust. We understand emergency response is critical. And with that said, what's even more critical and essential is the trust that all of our services through our community-based organizations and our staff bring to our community in those very situations. Because of that built trust, our staff and our community partners are called upon immediately when crisis, or even better yet, before there is a crisis, for an opportunity to prevent it. We are the before, the during, and the after. We are the front door and the place where trust is built and established and maintained. When our phone rings, it could be a conversation with another service provider, or a community member who just lost a loved one and is in need of support, or a young student saying, I'm just trying to figure out how to get to school safe. This is our grounding reminder about the work we do. The data sets we share in meetings go beyond numbers. They're connected to my loved ones and yours, our neighbors, and our community. Our community-based organizations and our staff continue to show up, and I want to highlight ways that we've been doing this. In our primary prevention lane, I want to highlight our outreach workers. And particularly, I want to take a time to highlight Urkel and what they've been doing in our schools, providing crucial services to those most impacted, redirecting youth to positive outlets in ways that focuses on trauma-informed care to help alleviate the hardships created by gun violence. From homes all the way into the high schools, they show up, removing barriers that are disrupting their students' access to education, transportation, food, technology assistance, and more. These organizations through our outreach program, Latino Network, POIC, and NEA, this is not uncommon. They continue to do it. Our first and second quarter, they connected over 228 teams for mentorship. They also helped over 450 youth get connected with jobs and employment. It is March, so I want to highlight, sometimes we don't talk about our women on the front line. Tanisha out of POIC, she runs an empowerment group for young ladies, and they meet weekly, 8 to 12 girls, addressing those things that they need most in that prevention lane, building them up even more. Responding very quickly, we had our Going Home to program, as well as POIC, have intensive case management, those most highest risk, making sure that they had what they need. And they served over 50 highest risk individuals for referrals for intensive case management, pushing out the door almost $63,000 money in direct assistance, cognitive behavioral therapy, and more. They will continue to show up. They will continue to stand, and they'll continue to work hard. So our ask is an ARPA ask. And we believe that the gun violence ordinance reduction, that literally was an investment that demonstrated a first step towards deep and long-term commitment to our community. It reflects that our city council believes in the work, and we have not seen an investment like this since the beginning of this office in 2006. So our request undergirds our ability to address gun violence through the public health approach through prevention and treatment. It moves gun violence away from a cultural issue to a national issue that impacts us all regardless of race. This package allows us to put high-risk care providers in the streets with the resources for the highest risk population. It allows us to put immediate care providers in the spaces and places where violence is occurring. It allows us to have mental health providers and their services in the hands of those that need it. It allows us to have our frontline workers who prevent, intervene, and interrupt. It allows us to collectively align best practices and services to address and reach the drivers, the trends, and those impacted by gun violence. This modest decision package ensures we stay the course and we move forward collectively, not backwards, on our understanding and commitment of what is needed to prevent, interrupt, and heal from gun violence. In my closing, our community not only has the solution, they are the solution. And collectively, we can continue to reduce the violence plaguing our community. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Green. Council, Mayor and Council, we have with us Deputy Chief Mike Fromm. He's here for Police Chief Chuck Lavelle, and he will be talking about Portland's Police Bureau and how they are currently acting with urgency. Chief?
Thank you, mayors and commissioners. Thanks for our time together this afternoon. My name is Mike Fromm. I'm the Deputy Chief of the Portland Police Bureau, and I use he, him pronouns. 2021 saw the city experience an alarming surge in gun violence. Our homicide investigation surged by over 50%, and sadly, we set a new record for the city. Shooting calls were up 40%. They continue to be up this year. Traffic fatalities were higher last year than years before. Our total calls for services, while slightly down, are still at 237,744 calls. Yeah, I'll get that specific on this one. 237,744 calls. 78,000 of those were high priority, meaning that it's a crime in progress or one involving an immediate threat to safety. That works out to about 213 high priority calls a day for PPB to work through. High priority calls take up more time, take up more officers than lower priority calls that generally have no immediate threat to safety and mostly deal with, thefts of property, things like that. Shooting scenes or traffic fatalities can tie up large amounts of officers very quickly, leaving no one to respond to either other high priority calls, much less the medium or low priority ones. It's not surprising that our call response times have gone up. We have fewer officers today than any time in the last 20 years. Last month, our response time for high priority calls averaged 14.2 minutes. It was about 8.2 minutes 2 years ago in 2020. I would like to point out that almost 60% of high priority calls do see a response in under 10 minutes, but the remaining 40% drag out the average. So what have we done to respond to this violence? Our primary response has been to take officers out of patrol and put them into specialized teams devoted to solving gun violence crimes and disrupting the cycle of violence in the streets. The Enhanced Community Safety Team, ECST, is made up of officers and detectives working gun violence cases. ECST and the detective division were critical in the identification and apprehension of the man responsible for the most recent homicide in Dawson Park, as well as 2 other shootings in the neighborhood only days before. The Focused Intervention Team, FIT, works with the Community Oversight Group, you'll hear it called COG, FIT-COG, to be strategically proactive in their approach to interrupting gun violence. FIT has been on patrol for a few months now. They continue to work with ECST and detectives as part of our comprehensive response to gun violence. We've reallocated detective resources due to the surge in homicides. We currently have 2 response teams and are creating a third. This third team is being created by diverting detectives from other assignments. Essentially, in 2021 and into 2022, the PPB is trying to do more with less. We know that we're asking our employees to shoulder a heavier load. This carries the risk of job dissatisfaction and burnout. So in 2021, we finally got serious about employee wellness. We moved our wellness plan out of a pilot program, instituted a directive that is very specific in what our hopes are for our employees. They're encouraged to focus on physical, mental, and spiritual health, working out, yoga, meditation, even learning a second language through Rosetta Stone. All are things we encourage our employees to consider. So what do we need? Well, quite simply, we need people. We need your support. We need people who want to be police officers, professional staff, or public safety support specialists. I often feel that in the chief's office, we're playing a shell game where we move officers and detectives around to cover the worst problem, only to find other problems developing. While we appropriately focus on gun violence today, we're barely able to provide any proactive efforts to blunt an auto theft problem that appears to be growing daily and impacts thousands in our city. Our asks in this budget are investments in public safety and proactive police work. These investments will signal the residents and prospective employees of the city of Portland that we are ready to address this public safety crisis. Our request for reallocation within our budget will get help to our investigative units that are, quite frankly, nearly overwhelmed with cases. They will make our precincts more available to the public. We spent the last year reallocating people into positions within our personnel division. We now have a sergeant and 2 officers working on recruitment. With the realignments in this budget, we'll have our background investigation team up to 18. Our team has streamlined our hiring process. We can shorten the time between recruitment and hire with motivated applicants. We are ready to embark on an ambitious hiring mission. Finally, we're asking for some one-time funding to support our employees. The ask for enhanced wellness will help keep our employees healthier, happier, as well as recognized as the valuable resources that they are. Thank you.
Thank you, Chief Fromm. Council and Mayor, it's my pleasure to introduce Fire Chief Sarah Boone, and she'll be talking about Portland Fire and Rescue and what they're currently doing to act with urgency. Chief Boone.
Thank you, Director Myers. Good afternoon, City Council, Mayor, Budget Advisory Committee. My name is Sarah Boone, Fire Chief for Portland Fire and Rescue. I use she, her pronouns. As Fire Chief, I have two main priorities that I face within this community safety system. The priorities are categorized as one of obligation and one of opportunity. My obligations as fire chief are dictated by city charter, state statute, and federal requirements. We have to maintain a robust emergency response system. The safety of our communities depends upon this vital link when all other systems have failed. This is the core of our service, fire and emergency response. Like any other critical infrastructure system that community members rely upon and use every single day, we constantly have to match the resources deployed to the risk levels inherent to the hazards in the communities we serve and provide essential services at a moment's notice to protect life, property, and the environment. We have been on the front line since the beginning of the pandemic and have worked collaboratively across city bureaus with our regional, state, and federal partner agencies and community stakeholders to reimagine and address the urgency of now. By investing in new technology and software programs, replacing 20-year legacy systems to improve operational performance through real-time analytics, sustainable investments in installation of rooftop solar panels, electric vehicle charging stations, and a hybrid electric emergency apparatus, as well as LED lighting and retrofitting. Even with limited resources and a current staffing model that puts us 10 years behind other comparable cities due to the dire state of priority issues impacting communities, we are only seeking one-time funding to accomplish critical work to reset the landscape and support our most urgent needs. Prior to our funding request, I want to speak about the opportunities we have before us. While preserving core fire and emergency services across the city, we also need to address the health inequities that are one of the primary drivers of the 911 calls for service. Portland Fire and Rescue sits in a unique position in the pre-hospital setting to change the trajectory of our community's overall health. Through innovative partnerships with the county, community-based organizations, and health systems, we have been able to leverage our healthcare workforce to keep people from falling into the emergency response side of the 911 system. This pandemic has devastated communities across the world, but through intersectionality, equity, collaboration, communication, and shared responsibilities, we have the potential to rise together. As an example, last year in Multnomah County, there were approximately 113,000 911 calls for service. Of those calls, 7,128 were from high utilizers of the 911 system. These are individuals who access the 911 side of the emergency response system for any and all of their healthcare needs. This segment of the population that made up the 7,128 calls was generated by approximately 400 people. As we estimate the cost of transport in an emergency room visit, Again, about $4,000. So the cost to that health system for 400 people in a 1-year period is around $29 million for 400 community members. As fire chief, when I say we sit in a unique position, I'm saying we have the potential to respond to these community members on the 911 side of the healthcare system and provide care in community, which you will hear in the next session when we talk about the Community Health Division and PSR and Community Health Assess and Treat. By doing this, we are able to divert away from these unnecessary emergency room visits in jail. As we face one of the greatest humanitarian crises today within this community safety system, it is imperative for the fire service to evolve from a place of emergency response alone to where preventative community health becomes a fundamental part of our overall mission. So what we need, my obligations. I will continue to advocate for one-time funding for a wildland coordinator, as we have been in enhanced outward-facing operations for 2 years, and this is an ARPA request. I chose this picture because this fire occurred within the first month of my appointment to fire chief. This was not in Forest Park. This was in the heart of a working class community off of 82nd Avenue across from a high school, a fire that was intentionally set in dry brush. We cannot control the weather. 85% of outside fires are human caused. And due to the pandemic, we're at an increased level of risk when it comes to fires. How we minimize that risk is through upfront planning, coordination, collaboration, prevention and education, response and mitigation to preserve and protect what is so precious today, our communities, housing, businesses, and the environment. This was a wind-driven fire that spread into a residential neighborhood and traumatized this community. An investment on the front side has the potential to indirectly save millions of dollars on the downstream side, which directly correlates to livability, community safety, housing, and economic recovery. The other decision packages of professional standards, limited term. Portland Fire needs to establish a formal unit and structure for managing investigations and complaints. This dedicated resources can help institute best practices for objective accountability and professional standards, as well as improve employee conduct and behavior that meets the values of Portland Fire and Rescue, the City of Portland, and the expectations of our communities we serve. And the last, restoring an EAP coordinator. This is a critical position at this time, and it supports our workforce that is routinely exposed and encounters trauma. Within the state and just across the river, the fire service has experienced 4 line of duty deaths within the last 5 months. That is to serve community. We are losing our lives. How we process and cope through the loss of our own, as we're still there to provide essential services to the communities. It is imperative to have a subject matter expert to coordinate the resources so firefighters can perform at their best with compassion and empathy. Thank you.
Thank you, Chief Boone. Next up, Council, and I would like to introduce to you Jana Papathimu, the Chief Resilience Officer for the Portland Bureau of Emergency Management, and she talks about what they are doing to currently act with urgency. Jana?
Thanks very much, Mike. I use she, her pronouns, and my slide shows pictures of people working in a shelter, working in the Emergency Coordination Center, learning first aid, and attending a community event. The Portland Bureau of Emergency Management, like other public safety bureaus we've heard from today, has seen a tremendous increase in the need for our services over the past 2 years. In addition to a huge mobilization to respond to COVID-19, we've also been called on to support camps for wildfire evacuees, to address severe smoke, to open severe heat shelters and winter weather shelters. The twin crises of housing and climate change mean the need for our services will continue, unfortunately, to be high in the foreseeable future. In response, we've strengthened our relationships with other bureaus. We've mobilized employees across the city for shelter work, and we've also deepened our engagement with community-based organizations, particularly those that serve communities of color. In order to meet the challenges of the current moment, we're asking for 3 things in this budget. First, a shelter coordinator. We're seeking a limited term staff person to develop concise trainings for shelter workers, to build a roster of people, both volunteers and employees, that can be mobilized more quickly when severe weather hits, and to develop policies and cost-sharing agreements with other city bureaus, the county, and the joint office over responsibilities in severe weather sheltering. We're also seeking crisis management software. Most emergency management agencies rely on computer software that's designed to manage emergency incident information in a way that protects security and integrity of data at the same time that it makes it available to responders across bureaus and across agencies. PBEM once had this software, but it reached the end of its useful life and its contract in the middle of the pandemic. We muddled through at that time, but the situation is not sustainable for us. So we are requesting funds to develop an information management system that will meet the needs of a modern agency. Finally, we're asking for help with an independent assessment. We recognize the demands on our bureau from both the community and other bureaus and offices have grown tremendously in the past 2 years. We're seeking resources to conduct an independent third-party assessment that can help us identify how to best leverage our own resources to meet the needs of the city, where we can partner with outside agencies, and what work we should be seeking to accomplish with contractors or other innovative approaches in order to meet essential needs with the resources that we have. Thank you.
Thank you, Jana. So in summary and closing on this first half, we are acting with urgency to address many urgent safety crises facing our city. And we need support to keep the engines running so we can continue to address the increased demand for our services. As you can see, what we desperately need to respond to increased demand for services across bureaus and offices is more staff and sustained funding for community level work. Let's open it up for question and answers. We have about 40 minutes. Mayor, if you'd like to lead us in this endeavor and start us off, do you have any questions?
I don't at this time, and I would ask that somebody else please facilitate the Q&A.
I can do that.
Thanks.
Of course. So let's go to Commissioner Hardesty to start. I'm going to go from on my screen from left to right. So this is the order that I'm choosing is simply by the boxes that are in front of me. Commissioner Hardesty, you are first up.
Thank you so much. I hate being first up, but it's okay. It's fine. Let me just say that thank you all for the presentation. It is really clear that our first responder bureaus all have some shared anxiety based on the last couple of years and what we've seen and where we're moving. I want to first start off by just really appreciating all the hard work that has gone into the last couple of years when all of us have been financially insecure, not knowing kind of where the footing was going to be. And each of you stepped up in ways that were pretty phenomenal. So let me just start there. And let me say, if I calculate correctly, if we approved all the requests for all the first responder bureaus, we'd have no money for anything else at the city of Portland. And so you all know that that's not going to be realistic. And as a coordinated effort, I'm really curious whether you've had internal conversations about prioritizing. What can we do now with limited resources, and what can we do now to help build back what it is we all want to see take place? And Bob, I'll just start with you. I mean, of course you need 911 operators, because if nobody answers the phone, we can't actually deploy anybody to emergencies. But the reality is that the amount of people you're asking for is unrealistic at any time in our budget, right? So what's the priority? If you're, here we are having a one-on-one, right? You've got 20 requests, I can fund 2. What are your priorities?
Yeah, thank you, Commissioner Hardesty. That's a great question, and I've wrestled with that. How do I prioritize this? We're looking at making sure that our staff has the feedback through the quality assurance program that we implemented back in May of this past year. And that's one thing that's lacking right now. So if I had to prioritize all of these positions, it would be one of those to start, one of the quality assurance analysts.
Thank you.
And then focus on filling dispatch positions. And then look at the other quality assurance analyst, and then the supervisory positions would be kind of at the bottom of that wish list, if you will.
Thank you. That's really helpful. And I have a question for Jana. Jana, only because I don't want to screw up your last name. I've been trying to
That's okay. It's Papa Eftimiou. It's gracious of you. It's fine.
For 3 years, I've been trying to practice in the mirror, and I'm getting better. But until I've mastered it, I will just call you Jana. Thank you. Jana, I want to say first that I have been really impressed with the work that you've done since the beginning of the first crises and your bureau, and the incredible work that you did really getting engaged with grassroots communities, over 100 that had never even heard of the city of Portland as it relates to partnerships and opportunities, right? I will ask you the same question I asked Bob. You have a lot of needs that are listed, and they're all understandable. But again, in the real world that we're living in, we're going to have to make some really hard choices. And if you and I were sitting at your kitchen table and I said, okay, you got 20 requests, what's the top? What's the top two?
What's the top for us? I think it's the shelter coordinator. To be honest, it's a limited term position. We've done a ton of work on sheltering in the last 2 years. I'm wearing out my team there. We're scrambling. We're pulling people in across the city to work that don't have all the training we want them to have. There's risk management issues there all the way around. And I feel like if we could just focus on it for a minute and get our arms around the issue, have more policy in place, have IJs in place, we could also long-term save money, because doing things the last minute is never the most efficient way.
I really appreciate that. Thank you. Chief Fromm, same question.
Commissioner, good to see you.
Likewise.
If they weren't important, we weren't asked for them. So, I mean, that is tough. And I know you're going to tell me, no, you have to choose. Of the ones that are in front of you, a bunch of our decision packages don't actually cost anything. So I think those are kind of just off the table. That's the realignment. Just me speaking, my next big one would be the 3.9 to basically make us whole for the realignment. Okay. That is, I know that's a big ask, but that gets us into our ability to have a really, really good target for hiring. After that, wellness. The wellness money is one time. It's not as ongoing, so I don't see it as the same category.
So, Chief, I guess for me, I'm curious with the police bureau. We actually put a lot of money into the police bureau during the fall bump. Most of the money that we allocated won't be used anytime soon. So I'm just wondering if there are things that are already, because you have these huge allocations that came in the fall bump, if there's been any reassessment about what's impossible that we thought we were going to be able to do in the fall bump, or which can't happen anytime soon, right? Is there a way to actually realign the new additions in the fall bump to what's being requested now? Because I'm kind of confused about how this builds on what we did in the fall.
Yeah, I mean, some of the money from fall is reflected in a carryover request that I believe the CBO is recommending that we do. I believe there is some other money that in the spring bump, the Bureau is probably going to be in a position to possibly be returning to the city. The folks that work with me indicate that some of that money might be available in the future for one time, but we're going to have to take a peek at that. I mean, ultimately, that's going to be a council type decision.
And that's exactly the kind of things we're going to be struggling with, because I have a long memory. I remember how much money we've already invested, and we're waiting to see outcomes. So I really appreciate that answer. And Chief Boone, let me just say that I am concerned about what's happening with fire, because clearly our folks have been on the front. Fire has been on the front line of every disaster we've had, with no time to recoup in between. I will ask you the same question. With your list, if we could only fund one or two, what would those one or two top priorities be?
Yeah, well, the top priority is protecting the community and protecting life. So it is the wildland coordinator that needs to really be in place and have, put everything that people have been working on over the last 5 years. So we have up-to-date citywide coordinated response. So I'm going to put the public first. Second thing is, I will say, and this is following Director Myers, who has tried to set this bureau up for success. And as I follow him, we are starting from a deficit. And when I say we're starting from a deficit, it is hard for me to look at Nike Green's presentation when we talk about violence reduction and look at all the potential opportunity, and John's slides when it comes to community, and I'm trying to recruit when it comes to BIPOC communities to come into the fire service and serve the community, change the system. With certain things not in place, I wouldn't ask anybody I know to step into Portland Fire. The institutions and the training centers and the logistics hold institutional harm. I can't even put firefighters in a burn room because the heat tiles are failing. So we have to create a contract with Tualatin Valley so recruits can just use a burner to learn their job. But I think what's critically important, if we're going to change the culture, if we're going to set a standard, if we're going to hold people accountable and be as professional as the citizens expect, it is that professional standards unit. And I know, so I'll just leave it at that, but I know it's limited term because as we work with Director Myers, I think there's a future plan to have a team and provide services to all the public safety bureaus, community safety bureaus. But for right now, we're in a deficit, and this is what I need to start.
Thank you all. I think
thank you,
that answers my questions. Thank you, Mike.
Yeah, thank you, Commissioner. Thanks for the thoughtful questions. We appreciate that. Commissioner Ryan, you're next up on my screen. And just to set the logistics for this session, we have about 30 minutes left, I believe. So.
Thank you, Director Myers. I didn't prepare a question. I didn't know, so I'm just going to.
That's okay.
Okay. So what I loved everything I heard so far, and thank you all for being here. And yesterday, we had the infrastructure bureaus. 2 days ago. Time flies. What I really appreciated is there was a big overview on how everything was a system. And then we had the individual presentations. And I think my question then to all of you, and one of you will be brave enough to start off with this, I'm curious how often you all meet as a system. What's that convening look like? And so I can understand how this system is being built. Because when I listen to it separately today, it just is really challenging to figure out how those dots connect. And so that's a system question.
Yeah, that's a great question, Commissioner. And I think in our last part of our presentation, we tell a couple of stories on how everything's linked. And I think you'll see how the collaboration exists between the groups. And I think that'll be defining for you. And if it's not, let's revisit this question at the next question and answer session, because I think we're going to answer this for you in the next part. Okay.
Can I get a second one then?
Sure. I mean, it'll cost you.
Okay, I'll remember that. So the second one is that there was a wellness theme that came up from a couple of you, actually several of you. And I think just for the public, for the public's good, can you go into a little bit more storytelling about that? But here's what I got from it. I don't know how concrete you're all being. Serving the public in a community safety system in Portland, Oregon in 2022 is traumatic for some. I don't want to put words in your mouth, but you're nodding. So I'm just trying to, okay. And so what I'm hearing from you is that morale is an issue. Is that correct?
Yes.
But can you get a little bit more blunt about this? Because
Sure.
That's a concern. Everyone knows that we're having trouble with recruitment. It looks like there's trouble with retention. So I assume you're trying to get at improving the data on those 2 points. Is that, so just give me some dialogue on this.
Yeah, I can kind of help. And if one of the chiefs want to jump in, they certainly can. Okay, so you asked to get kind of more blunt on this. Here's the situation with first responders across the nation, across the United States. It is clear that police and firefighters and call takers have a higher risk for heart attack, in firefighters, a higher risk of cancers. And this is very common knowledge in the industries. So, as we transfer our new employees from FPDNR and they get into Oregon PERS, the city is going to start to be on the hook for heart, lung claims, and other claims. If we do nothing at all, what I've found I've been here for 35 years in the industry, 20 as an executive, working, not just running fire departments and 911 centers, but running health and wellness centers for those firefighters and those call takers and police officers. One thing was very, very apparent. When we did nothing and we first introduced them to mandatory physicals, let's say, we found that our firefighters were about 25% of them were at high risk for heart attack at any given moment. That means when the chief's on the scene and she's telling a firefighter, 4 of them, to go in a building and raise their heart rate from resting to 190 beats per minute and keep it there for the next 15 minutes and don't come out till I tell you to come out, that we're putting people in there that are high risk for heart attack. And that's not to mention the cancer rates. So when we instituted physicals in other cities that I've worked in, and this isn't the normal physical that I would go to and just see a doctor and get a regular physical. I'm talking about an industrial athlete physical, stress testing, scans for cancers early. I have an opportunity to talk to a doctor about drug abuse and alcohol abuse and depression and anger and all the things that go along with all kinds of first responders. When we did that, over a couple of years, we were able to reduce that 25% risk for heart attack down to single digits. And it changed people's lives. And we found cancers early enough that we could correct them and they weren't dying of cancer. And so we need to take those steps at some point, Commissioner. And I think that's why you're starting to hear, this is always an issue for Chief Boone and Chief Fromm. They're well aware of the health issues that their members have. And so it's just exacerbated when it comes to first responders. It's a difficult, stressful jobs, including 911 call takers. So if I'm very much supportive, if we can find opportunities, if we have rollover dollars, and I believe we do, and Commissioner Hardesty hinted at this, get creative, Mike, is what I read in code, was I believe we have some rollover dollars that we might be able to cover some of these one-time things that are so important to Chief Fromm and so important to Chief Boone and so important to Jana and Director Causey. And I'm prepared to come back and show how we might be able to cover that. But I do believe those health and wellness investments are very important from here going forward. And we need to do those things. And Commissioner, I hope that helps answer your question and lend some bluntness to it.
It did. Chief Boone, did you want to add to that?
Yeah, thank you, Commissioner Ryan. I'm only adding to it because, this is really a transformational time. And it's a time that none of us could even have predicted. But just as Director Myers has said, in the fire service and what we expose people to, it is a very hard job. And it does shorten your life, whether it's your exposure to carcinogens, to asbestos, to toxins, to diesel exhaust, as well as the mental health when it comes to what you see in the field. We have been studying firefighters because it's a 24-hour schedule. So there is poor nutrition, poor sleeping habits. That's just part of the job. And that really doesn't put you at your best. And so what we're seeing is compounded stress. And this started, you already had a base level that we knew that we experienced trauma. But I think what we have seen within a compressed time frame is a lot of death that's not natural, right? And there's not that support staff that we can just share the load. And for us, because we're understaffed and we're going to accelerate training and do lateral hires to get more people in, firefighters, we've had the mandatory firefighters just to fill work shifts more than they really should be working. But that's in order to maintain this system. And so I think just with the compounded additional stress, the trauma that you see from loss of life in the pandemic, as Chief Fromm was saying, from gun violence, we're on every auto accident when it comes to pedestrian deaths. That takes a toll. But then you also have to deal with the stresses at home for single parents, for school changes, for childcare and elder. So I will just say we are right at the breaking point when it comes to morale. But I also want to thank this council because you leaned in when we asked for additional help and additional hours to recover. But we do need that expert to help us with resources, connect to resources.
Thank you, Chief. Commissioner Ryan, if it's okay, I'll move to the next.
Can I just do a comment that
Sure.
The reason I asked this question was because it was a thread line that I heard from everyone. So when we talked and I began talking about system through lines. So I hope that we can pick this up and see that this is a shared issue amongst all of the presentations today. And then we can look at some efficiencies in the system for this wellness. And I just also want to make the final comment, which is I so appreciate all of you on the front lines for all that you're doing. And I hope that if you're listening, you know that we're all thinking about you and that you put your city, the love for your city first each and every day. And that's a lot of sacrifice. So thank you.
Commissioner Meyer, thank you. Commissioner Mapps, you're up next, and then Commissioner Rubio. Commissioner Mapps.
Thanks, Mike. I have, I think, two questions I want to get on the table. One has to do with homicides, and I'd like to pose that to Director Green and Chief Fromm. One of my top priorities, as everyone knows, is to reduce homicides here in Portland. If you go back to 2016, we had 14 homicides. Last year, we had 90 homicides. Right now, we're on track to perhaps exceed 90 homicides, which is a grim milestone. Why don't we start out with Director Green? Can you provide us with some insight into what is driving the increase in homicides here in Portland?
Thank you, Commissioner Mapps. Definitely, and I want to just make one comment to Commissioner Ryan. Don't forget our community partners who are on the front line. They're in the same trenches and at the same scenes and are experiencing the same trauma in the homes, the hospitals, and they too are needing that healing. They too are needing the encouragement. So to all our frontline workers that are out there with our community-based organizations, we see you, we hear you, and we got you. In regards to your point, Commissioner Mapps, what we're seeing from our perspective, I'm going to start in a few different things. So there's multiple drivers, as we all know. And so one of those drivers is we just know right away, we can look at the increase of gun sales. Let's not forget they increased in 2020, right? And so we know that if you just look at the definition of gun violence, it literally means, by its definition, violence committed with the use of a firearm. And a lot of times we don't mention that, but I just want to make sure we understand that. Legally and illegally, there is an enormous amount of firearms available and accessible to our community for the good, the bad, the indifferent. We know the pandemic itself was a driver and that it took away the sense of community through the removal of social gatherings, the ability to come together. It removed social supports and those social services that allowed our communities to have access to those things that they were need. It removed frontline workers and individuals for supports for our families and our community as a whole. We know space and place makes a difference when around people being overexposed to violence, as we talk about in crime prevention by environmental design. We also know that there's a driver in social media and that our outlets have amplified this trend or this culture that we are normalizing the desensitization of human life. We have painted a picture across the nation that it is okay to resolve conflict with a gun. And we've seen that in multiple ways. And unfortunately, it's one of our drivers today. At the same time, as we have just stated, the institutions that are responsible for responding to violence, including fire and police and community organizations and all of us that are represented here, were placed under an unsurmountable amount of stress and pressure. This perfect storm and all happening at the exact same time has caused a disruption and an increase in gun violence and homicide. COVID outbreak, economic disruption, people are scared. But we need to lean in with hope because it was removed. And our job, and everybody on this call, my thank you is we keep showing up and we have to grab back onto hope so we can change that narrative and show up in these places.
Great. Thank you, Director Green. And Chief Fromm, I'd like to ask you the same question. Director Green gave us a very comprehensive answer, but do you have anything else you'd like to add?
You know, I agree with everything that she says. From the police perspective, what we are seeing is COVID compressed us, and whenever there's pressure, you're going to have problems. And we've seen it. We've seen it within our unhoused communities. Violence rates is definitely higher among the unhoused than it's been in the past. We definitely continue to see problems with I guess I call them younger because at my age, anyone in their 20s is younger. But 20s into 30s, we're seeing what she talked about with the social media influence of people are willing to go shoot at each other over a diss on social media. And those are the things that we're dealing with. And then the police would say, we also, with the overwhelming numbers that we've encountered, we are not able to respond as quickly on these shootings and on these homicides to ensure that there is a sense of accountability. And so that's what we need to improve on.
Chief, well, number one, thank you for that answer. Number two, in your professional assessment, will the investments that have been proposed today reduce the number of homicides that we're seeing? Are we going to, if we make this, are we going to see fewer than 90? If we make these investments, are we going to see fewer than 90 homicides?
The investments that you're doing today are not going to see immediate fruition for that type of reduction in homicide. Investing in the police bureau right now is really more of a long-term strategy. There are some immediate payoffs in some of our proposals in terms of getting quicker help to our investigators. But the bulk of our asks, the big asks for the increased ramp up in hiring, we will not really start to see that pay off for a couple of years. So in the meantime, we just have to continue to look for short-term solutions in ours, continue to support the work of Nike at OVP, and try to find ways to just calm things down out in the streets.
Okay, thank you, Chief. And I have another category of questions which I'd like to send towards PBIM. And my questions have to do with emergency warming shelters. Life-saving, very important. I support it as 110%. On the other hand, I would like to, I'm curious to the degree to which our warming shelter services are coordinated with things done by the Joint Office.
I'm glad you asked. We work very close with the Joint Office and with the Department of County Human Services. I and others on our team meet weekly with the Joint Office and with Multnomah County all year round to plan for how we'll do shelter response. We have an intergovernmental agreement with JOS, and we get paid back for the expenses that we incur for food and cots and things like that we use in the sheltering. They pay for the cleaning and security. So in terms of costs, we're recovering most of the costs. But we're still struggling because there's an increase in the houseless population, and also because of COVID, needing to have more space around people in shelters means we need to take up more locations to do sheltering. And every time you open another location, you need more staff to be present and cover it. And we, even with having several contracted service providers, we just find that in those emergency events, when we want to turn no one away and open all the doors, it's all hands on deck to make sure that nobody is left outside in the cold. And I would also add, a severe weather sheltering for cold has always been an issue, but until this summer, we had never opened a cooling shelter in the summer. We did it 3 times this summer, and I think I fear that that's something that heat and smoke both will cause us to continue to do that and make sheltering more of a year-round operation than it's been.
Great. I'm glad to hear all that, and really appreciate the collaboration with the Joint Office. And Mike, right now, those are all the questions I have.
Commissioner, thank you for those questions. Commissioner Rubio.
You, Director Myers. And first, I just want to, again, echo my colleagues in giving you all big appreciations, all the directors of the bureaus and staff of the bureaus that are here today. It's evident, it's been a very challenging recent time, and I just really deeply appreciate the extra hours and the heart and soul that you've all poured into your work, into making sure that Portland is safe, and that our communities are healthy to the extent that we can be all right now. I just have a couple questions. A lot has been referenced, and a lot of the answers and questions that my colleagues have had, but one of them is for Jana, just to go a little bit deeper, looking at the shelter coordinator position that you described. Can you talk a little bit about how that intersects with the new structure being set up under the emergency declaration, so I can get a picture of how that's going to work?
Oh, for sure. And I'll take a swing at it, and then and Director Myers may join me. But our intention is that really PBEM just works, or we try to be focused on the real emergencies. So when we are 25 degrees or colder for 4 more hours overnight, or when we hit the highlight that National Weather Service is a severe risk to the majority of the population in terms of heat. So on either end, that's when we open up all the shelters, and we are working closely with the systems that set up there during those moments. But in the other times, whatever, I don't have to tell anybody here, housing is an emergency every day in Portland. And so behind the scenes, when we're not in those severe events, then we're looking to support Mike's team with knowledge about skills in running an incident command system, and how to do situation status reporting, and what dashboards do we have for sheltering, and kind of the shared tools that we can have around information sharing and coordination, so that we're just better positioned to work smoothly all the year.
Okay, great. And just one question to add on to that too. And so is this position also something that could potentially work when there's extreme heat?
Yes.
Cooling centers and okay.
Yes, it'll for heat, for smoke, and cold as well, and really to have a system set up that we can turn on when we need it. So if it was a hotel fire, then we would be able to turn to it then too.
Excellent. Thank you. My second question was to Chief Fromm, and you talked a little bit about the challenges operating at full capacity right now, and fortifying the staffing so that we can really be responsive to our fullest degree. Can you give us a little bit of a picture of how the recruitment is going right now, and how that's moving forward, and what do you project in this next year?
So it's a little early to say a definite projection over the entire year, but what I can tell you is that, like, within the last month, we've had 200 applicants come in for the role of a police officer, We have just opened up public safety support specialists again and are working on reestablishing a hiring list for there. Hiring is, I got a report from the Police Executive Research Forum this morning. And what it shows me is what we are experiencing here, which is in 2020, hiring dropped to nothing across the United States when it came to police officers. In 2021, we are starting to see it come back. And everything indicates that in 2022 and moving forward, we will return to having people that are interested in being police officers again, in being public safety support specialists again, when we manage to tailor our marketing to that section better. So what I'm going to tell you is that with the staff that we have in place, I am completely confident that 2022 is going to be a year that we have not experienced in probably like the last 10 years in who we are going to get in and hopefully get into the police academy and then out on the streets to be trainees. I don't have an exact number to promise you, but it is going to be better than anything you've seen in the last 10.
Wow, that's promising. And can you give us a little bit of an idea of, and maybe you don't have the information right now, but what is the demographic breakdown, or does it look like there would be more capacity to be reflective of what Portland looks like today?
I'll be blunt. We struggle across the board to attract diverse applicants, but that is our challenge, and that is what we are working hard at doing. And prior to 2020, I think if we go back historically and look at our numbers, we were moving in the right direction. We just need to make sure that we not lose sight of where we need to go for equity and just try to get numbers. All right. Mm-hmm. That's my commitment to this group, is that that's not going to be forgotten. It's part of the team's focus as well. We are reaching out outside of the state of Oregon. We've had people down in Arizona. They were in Nevada. We're going wherever we think that we can find people that want to be police officers, where we are going to find a diverse pool to try to entice them to get out of the dry, nasty states down there and move up to the relatively lush state of Oregon. So,
thank you. And last question, just so I have an idea, a better understanding. So of the 200 that you're referencing in applicants, what does that typically mean in terms of people actually hired when you go through the process? Just so I'm understanding how much you have to recruit to get that to that place.
It greatly depends on what quality of applicant that we're getting. All right. So if we just cast out the net, anybody can get in there. Generally, we're very happy if we get what we would call like a 10% return. So of those 200 applicants, if we can get 20 that we're able to actually offer jobs to, we're considering ourselves in good shape. Sometimes it's a little less, sometimes it's a little more. Again, that goes back to our recruitment. We need to make sure that when we are out there talking with people and recruiting people, that we are not encouraging folks that have no chance in our system to get through. And then we need to work with our applicants to make sure that they have everything that they need to succeed within our system.
Okay. Well, thank you, Chief. I just, this is really an important point for me. So anything our office can do to support you in that, we're really eager to do that. So
I appreciate it.
Excuse me, Mike, if you don't mind, I'd like to ask a quick question of Chief Fromm.
Certainly, Commissioner. We have about 15 minutes left for this Q&A. We'll give a little time for the Community Advisory Board and then the mayor. So please ask the question.
Okay, the quick question, Mike, is what's the difference between what you're doing to hire police and what's being proposed by Human Resources to hire police?
I think the work that we are doing within the Bureau is more of the travel to locations and get them in touch with police officers. Whereas I think the work that BHR is doing for us is really more focused on how do we get our brand out there among job searchers. I know it seems like not much of a difference, but we're really more of the hands-on focus. Whereas I think BHR is really helping us out more behind the scenes with search engine optimization, getting us into the right publications, things like that.
Thank you.
All right, team. Mayor Wheeler, if it's okay with you, Mayor, I'd like to ask the Community Advisory Board if they have any questions. We've got about a little under 15 minutes left, and then we will come to you for some closing questions. Is that okay? I see a nod. So representative from the Community Advisory Board, if you have any questions, now would be the time. Again, we have about 12 minutes left, and we're going to give the mayor a couple minutes to ask any questions if he has any. And go ahead and speak up if you I'm looking
I
at all
think
the different
Sho
names.
was about to speak, but then he put himself on mute.
No, I don't have
Can't
any
hear you,
questions.
Sho.
No questions.
Oh, okay.
Thank you. Anyone else from the Community Advisory Board? Mayor, I'm not hearing any other questions from Community Advisory Board. The floor is yours if you have any other questions.
Yeah, I'll probably prompt some, and I'll be brief. I really don't have questions as much as I do thoughts. And I know that's perilous territory. First of all, I want to applaud all of you leaders, our first responders. This has been a hell of a 2 years. And in my opinion, and you can take it or leave it, I think you've done an exemplary job. That's not to say everything has been perfect. It has not. We're all humans here. But I think you've done an exemplary job, and particularly those of you who are in chief positions or bureau leadership positions, people have pushed you hard. We've pushed you hard. But here's sort of where I'm coming from. The farther we get into this, and by this I just mean year 3 of COVID and everything associated with it, the economic downturn, the increased drug abuse, mental health issues, gun violence, all of that, I have come to the conclusion that the old model of city government is no longer going to work. I think it is now officially obsolete. And I'm not just talking about the form of government question being taken up by the Charter Commission. I think the way we are thinking about how we manage and organize and deliver city services is fundamentally obsolete. And as proof of that, I would point out that we're working harder than ever with limited resources, and the public is madder than hell at all of us. They do not believe that we are delivering even the most basic services well. And so when I start thinking about that, and I start thinking about the implication, what's happening is it exactly, and Chief Boone, you said it exactly right. It's the perfect storm. I mean, as you know, the need for all of our services goes through the roof, our ability to deliver those services is impaired. And on top of it all, our employees are done. They're through. And we're going to lose a lot of them. We know it. We know in the next year and a half, a lot of people are going to hang up their hats. And unfortunately, the people who are hanging up their hats are the kind of people who need to be culled from a very rarefied group of people with high levels of skill. I mean, you said it, not a lot of people can get by with 2 minutes at 190 beats per minute, much less 15 minutes as a regular part of their training. I'm worried about burnout. So while we're spending a lot of time talking about recruiting, I am actually more worried about retention. Recruiting is going to be tough for, people down the street at my local grocery store can't recruit people. Recruiting is going to be tough. We already know that. So now it's about retention. That's where the game is, because if we can have our employees feel healthy, supported, mentally well, they don't take their jobs home with them. They feel that they're in a work environment that's flexible to the degree it can be, respectful of them and their families, have advancement and training opportunities. They are our best allies in terms of recruitment. If they just say, look, the proverbial S has hit the fan, and Portland is trying to reinvent itself. Portland government is trying to rethink and innovate to respond to the changing dynamics in our society, this is where the action is. And these people take good care of us. They care about us as employees. That's going to do better than one more HR person or recruiting at one more place or whatever. I'm not saying that's not important, but I just feel like we need to rethink this. When I'm thinking about the budget, here's sort of my list of concerns. Chief Boone, I know you said you don't like using other people's training facilities, and I know the police have said the same thing, but right now collaboration is key. If we can collaborate with other governments and blow aside the jurisdictional boundaries for a little while and talk about how do we collaborate on in any area that's inward facing that helps our employees, that's probably going to be necessary in the short term, barring the ability to get a lot of resources. And as we know, the community's not ready to hear from us on new bonds for new facilities. We're going to have to collaborate with other jurisdictions. And it may go beyond training facilities. It may be IT, it may be HR, it may be back office services and operations, ways that we haven't even thought about it. The second source of funding after collaboration, which is basically free, let's talk about what is one time only. And Jonna mentioned that some of her asks are really limited duration asks that can make a big impact in the near term. ARPA is on the table, and I think we should think really hard about what programs we can prioritize that can be funded immediately. Then there's the hard part, which is prioritizing services. I believe anybody in elective office hates to go through the exercise of what lines of business do we get out of, but ladies and gentlemen, that's where we are. We need to rethink what the city's priorities are, what the public is asking us to do, and we need to get out of some lines of business altogether and focus those resources on critical areas of service. And since we're sitting here today talking about life safety, I can't think of anything more critical than supporting our life safety services. And so there's probably a bunch of nice to haves that were built into the city infrastructure at a time when the city coffers were flush and we were facing less crises, but this isn't that time. And maybe some of those nice to haves need to go by the wayside for a while until we get our Basic Services Act into order. Last but not least, the public isn't part of this. I think we do a horrible job of explaining what we do and how we do it. That, when city commissioners have 8% approval ratings, I mean, you have to really try hard to have an 8% approval rating, which is, I think, where I am, right? And I think where most of my colleagues are. Like, I know really obnoxious people who at least 20% of people think they're okay, and we're at like 8%. That tells me we are not coordinating with the people we serve very well. And so I hope all of the coordinated efforts that you're leading, Mike, include the public. How are we going, now that neighborhood associations are meeting again, community meetings are happening again, how do we, instead of having the public organizing and saying we aren't doing enough and we are failing and we need to do things differently, how do we turn that into rather an us versus them? How do we turn that back into an us together, a we together dynamic where we are working on behalf of and directly with the community rather than reacting to what the community is saying? I think that will go a long way towards restoring the community's trust. If we can focus on basic services, prioritize the right things, show that we're being fiscally responsible through collaboration, thoughtful one-time only investments, and going through the tough exercise of prioritizing, taking care of our employees because they are ultimately 6,000 of our best ambassadors in this community. And engaging the public in a more meaningful way than we've been able to do, frankly, since I got here. I think those things will go a long way towards helping us reinvent government the way it needs to be reinvented. I don't think anything less than a little facelift ain't going to do it. We need to fundamentally refocus the way we deliver services. That's my lecture. Sorry.
No, Mayor, I think it was extremely timely. I think we're going to take a quick break for about 10 minutes, and then we're going to come back, Mayor, And we're going to be talking about re-envisioning community safety and transforming the system. That is the title of the second half of this presentation. So exactly what is ruminating in your mind is exactly what's going on with your public safety team. We're having the same conversation. And you're going to hear stories about how we've collaborated across at least multiple bureaus, and it's been driven by what the community believes needs to be done. And I absolutely 100% agree with you. So I'm hoping that what you'll hear in the second half is inspiring. Mayor, I would recommend a 10-minute break, and then let's reconvene, and I will take on the second half of the presentation if that's something you can support.
Yeah, absolutely. A 10-minute break would be terrific. It's almost 3:30. Why don't we reconvene at 3:40?
That sounds good, Mayor. 3:40, and I will be prepared to go.
Awesome. We are in recess. right, Mike, thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. Director Kennard, okay for me to start? Mayor and Council, again, for the record, my name is Mike Myers. I am the Community Safety Transition Director for the City of Portland. And this is the second half of our budget work session around community safety. Mayor, you ended the last session talking about collaboration and the need to re-envision change and the way we do business. And I had an opportunity at the very beginning to thank a few partners, including yourself and your council members, on their support as we built out this brand new division to do just what you were saying. I also want to make sure that I recognize the Office of Management and Finance. This is led by Tom Reinhardt, who's the CAO. And the individuals within OMF across the board, from OMF personnel to Aaron Rivera in budgeting and their communications teams, have been helping us regularly. I want the team to know that throughout the many, many weeks for a couple of years now to put this program together. And so I want to recognize that collaboration internally with OMF and thank those team partners for all the work that they've done, for their support and their patience to help get us to where we are today. We are going to talk for the next 40 minutes or so about re-envisioning community safety and transforming our system. So why does Portland need to re-envision our approach to community safety? The need for change. As you know, our current system creates silos between community safety bureaus and offices and is inefficient. The public safety work group started 2 years ago with an acknowledgement that we need to reorganize our system to do better, to align our efforts, leverage our common resources, and build the structures that will allow us to look across bureaus and for what the communities need to be safe. We have a demand for change. Portlanders have also demonstrated they want the system to change. Since George Floyd's murder in summer of 2020, we have seen unprecedented calls to reimagine how we do public safety, to develop alternative service models and acknowledge how our system has perpetrated hurt against BIPOC and other marginalized communities, and to change our responses to align with the city's values of anti-racism and equity. The vision for change. We want to build one holistic system that is responsive, accountable, equitable, and effective at keeping communities safe. This system would build alternative service models, send the right responder to the right call, align its internal governance structure with its goals, and reduce the need for public safety response. This requires operational changes, new response mechanisms, and an overall change in the way we view what keeps communities safe in order to build resilience and reduce the demand for response. Amid unprecedented community safety challenges and the need to act with urgency to address them, we continue to do the work of re-envisioning community safety and transforming our system. The operational change, community safety consolidation. You are all aware that discussions began several years ago about how we could address the siloed nature of our public safety system by aligning, in particular, back-end enterprise functions such as budget and strategy, timekeeping, and procurement in one centralized location. Work to date. Almost 1 year ago, you hired me as your Community Safety Transition Director to lead this consolidation effort. Since then, we've hired an analyst to lead the Police Accountability Commission and a strategic project manager. In the fall bump, you approved the transfer of one FTE from Portland Police Bureau to become the Community Safety Division Business Services Manager. That's Ken Lee. On Monday, we posted 2 finance analyst positions that, once filled, will support Portland Fire and Rescue and Portland Bureau of Emergency Management. The next steps. We are requesting a budget neutral transfer of 20 finance FTE from Portland Police Bureau and Bureau of Emergency Communications to the Community Safety Division. The transfer of these positions have been agreed upon in discussions with the public safety bureaus and will remain embedded in their bureaus while reporting to the CSD Business Services Manager, who currently already supervises 17 of these employees. We have a detailed service level description document in place to outline how these positions will be transferred without disruption to Bureau's frontline services. We are also requesting $200,000 to support the development of a community safety strategic plan, which will guide future consolidation efforts. I want to take this opportunity to introduce you to Michelle Koenig-North, who is looking at alternative service models, specifically 311. Michelle?
Thank you, Director Myers, and good afternoon, Council. I'm Michelle Koenig-North, the 311 Program Manager. We've spoken today about the challenges facing the city's community safety system, including the strain the growing numbers of calls placed to 911 and the public safety non-emergency line is placing on the Bureau of Emergency Communications. In 2019, City Council approved the creation of a 311 program to provide a centralized point of contact so that community members can readily access local government information and services. Council also created the 311 program with the intent of providing an alternate contact to 911 and the public safety non-emergency line for community needs that don't require a first responder. Currently, community members often call the non-emergency line for many non-urgent questions and services that don't require police response. For example, they may call to report an abandoned vehicle, to report graffiti, or perhaps a neighbor's barking dog, or to request public records or find government information. In fact, about half of the calls placed to the non-emergency line do not meet BOEC's dispatch criteria. Instead, a BOEC call taker provides the caller with basic information or refers them to another resource. The 311 program currently responds to many of these same types of questions and requests. While these calls are answered after calls placed directly to 911, they represent a sizable portion of overall call volumes to the 911 Operations Center and have a significant impact on BOEC's operations and performance. Many jurisdictions throughout the US, including San Francisco, Denver, Atlanta, and Washington, D.C., use their 311 programs to intake, triage, route, and resolve non-emergency calls from the community, allowing their 911 programs to focus on emergency needs. The 311 program has been working closely with the Bureau of Emergency Communications and the city's public safety bureaus to determine how to best use the 311 program's capacity, institutional knowledge, and customer service professionals to better serve community members while supporting BOEC's capacity to answer emergency calls. Through this work, we've identified two significant opportunities which could dramatically reduce the number of non-emergency calls BOEC receives by migrating these calls to 311. The first is migrating non-incident, non-dispatched calls. These are the calls we were talking about before that are frequently referred to other agencies and are well suited to the 311 program. Migrating these approximately 140,000 calls per year would dramatically lower call volumes at BOEC. The second opportunity is to migrate additional low priority non-emergency calls, such as assisting community members in filling out online police reports. This work could shift an additional 40,000 calls per year. In total, these efforts could reduce non-emergency calls to the 911 Operations Center by about 47% annually, but they would require extending 311 service hours and hiring additional call-taking staff. To reach this goal, we need to accomplish three things. First, community members have to know to call 311 for appropriate non-emergency needs. They must be able to successfully dial 311 and reach the 311 program. And when they contact 311, they have to reach a customer service professional who can help. So to those ends, we're developing a countywide 311 education campaign to formally launch 311 to the community and help improve understanding of when to call 911 and when to call 311. We're working with regional phone providers to make sure residents and visitors throughout Multnomah County can successfully dial 311 from any landline or cell phone and reach the 311 program. We're working with the Bureau of Technology Services to deploy new customer service tools, including new online web forms and back-end customer service management software, which will allow the public to conveniently report more issues without calling the public safety line. And we're working to increase our staff capacity to handle more calls. We've hired or are in the process of hiring 8 additional call-taking staff, a customer service supervisor, and 3 additional operational staff. In this year's budget process, the 311 program is requesting ongoing funding for 10 additional staff to expand our operations to cover evening and weekend hours, times when BOEC traditionally receives high number of non-emergency calls and has long hold times that exceed benchmarks. We're also requesting staff to provide sufficient capacity to handle the 180,000 additional non-emergency calls per year we're looking to migrate from the non-emergency line. Finally, and critically, we are working with the city's public safety and infrastructure bureaus to ensure 311 staff have the information, training, and capacity to help community members with non-emergency needs. I'm immensely proud of our 311 staff who work every day to help make local government more accessible to our community. We look forward to continuing to work with our city and regional partners to provide equitable and convenient access to government information, services, and programs in the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Michelle. Council, I would like to now introduce Division Chief Chris Matthews, who's going to talk about alternative service models in Portland Fire and Rescue's Community Health Division. Chief Matthews, welcome.
Thank you, Director Myers. Again, my name is Tim Matthews. My pronouns are he, him. I'm the Division Chief of Portland Fire and Rescue's Community Health Division, which includes CHAT, our Community Health Assess and Treat teams, PSR, Portland Street Response, and Community Connect. The Community Health Division has 3 pillars, and this was the brainchild of Chief Boone and Lisa Reslock, who's here on the call also to answer questions. CHAT and PSR are 2 non-traditional first response programs that are made up of multidisciplinary teams that respond in small vehicles, typically SUVs, versus large apparatus like engines and trucks. Community Connect is the outreach pillar of the division. This goes back to the opportunities that Chief Boone spoke about during her presentation. CHAT, Community Health Assess and Treat teams respond on 911 low acuity medical calls. An example of a low acuity medical call are back pain, falls, sick individuals, stomach aches, etc. Calls that typically don't result in a hospital stay or they're in and out of the hospital within 2 hours. The 3-year average of low acuity calls for Portland Fire and Rescue is approximately 25,000. And as Chief Boone mentioned, it's about $4,000 per transport on these calls. So there's a huge amount of money involved on these type of calls. The CHAT teams are composed of EMTBs that are managed by a critical care nurse that serves as their triage consultants. This is the lowest healthcare provider model available. Portland Street Response responds to low acuity mental and behavioral health calls. These calls traditionally have been responded to by police. The teams are composed of mental health clinicians, peer supporters, and EMTs. They are unarmed responders using trauma-informed care to help those in crisis. Finally, Community Connect is our outreach pillar that connects our citizens to resources like mobile vaccination teams, which over the last couple of years in partnership with Multnomah County, we have vaccinated 105,000 individuals. Meds on Wheels, high utilizers, community education, lift assist, and finally a resource center. The Community Health Division has specific overarching goals. The first one is to meet people where they are, to actually provide services to the individuals regardless of their background, wherever they're at. Second is to improve their health outcomes by connecting them with the appropriate care, resources, and education. And the third is to decrease unnecessary emergency department visits and arrest. Portland Fire is not a traditional non-emergency healthcare provider. We are an all hazards emergency response bureau. We go on fires, hazmats, wildland incidences, marine rescues, technical rescues, CBRNE, which is your nuclear biological responses, and major medical calls like CPR, heart attacks, major traumas, et cetera. However, in terms of emergency response model, our entire system that we're talking about here today, Portland Fire sits in a very unique position between when a person is in crisis and they're calling 911 and their actual response on the streets. This is a gap in our service delivery model. And we believe that by meeting people at that area, we can overall drastically improve their outcome and drive down the cost. Over the last 10 years, the healthcare system, because of its complexity, has made it common for community members to call 911 for all of their medical needs. This has resulted in a drastic increase in the 911 system and the call volume of all those on this call today. The police call volume has increased, fire's call volume has increased, OAC receives a lot of calls, AMR, et cetera. In essence, the medical system is so complex that it's a default. Call 911, somebody comes, we help you. Our first responders are being asked to respond to these calls However, our major emergencies are still coming in. Our fires have not decreased over the last 10 years. They've actually increased due to numerous reasons. Portland Fire and Rescue has re-envisioned our delivery model by creating a vision to address the rising calls that are coming in through the 911 system to provide the right responder for the right call type, and again, to meet people where they are. We believe the first interaction we have with a community member who has called 911 is an opportunity to change their trajectory of their overall health. We can get them connected to the right resources, their primary care physician, connect them with their insurance, provide treatments right in the field, and look at their overall living situation, their social and behavioral determinants of health, and provide assistance. Truly getting them the right care at the right time. Our proposed expansion of this model over the coming year will be based on data-driven outcomes and quality improvement measures. We have key performance indicators that we monitor on a bi-weekly basis. This response model allows us to maximize the life of large apparatus by not using them unnecessarily on these low acuity calls. And it also maintains our response reliability for having the fire responders available for other critical calls. Our progress to date. With chat, we have 2 units in operation across the city in the southeast and downtown core, with plans to expand to 4 units 7 days a week in Q2 this year. Portland Street Response has 2 units in operation and is in the process of expanding. To date, PSR has responded on approximately 1,000 calls, 90% which were calls traditionally responded to by the police. This is all done by 9 people, and it was really under Commissioner Hardesty's direction that this program was adopted and created in the first place. And so we really want to acknowledge her team and her office's help with this. PSR is going to go citywide in March of this year on the 28th, and there will be a 1-year update to council, which is scheduled on April 26th. The next steps are the Community Health Division is partnering with agencies across the city, specifically the ECC, our CBOs, Multnomah County for IGAs, the health systems to meet the growing demands of the city. Some of those examples are COVID-related endeavors, disaster preparedness, increasing our high utilization responses, a comprehensive resource center, and some other state and federal entities. That's a brief synopsis of this division. We're super excited to be part of it. I really want to thank Commissioner Hardesty's office and Chief Boone for their vision in creating it. It's one of the first in the nation that has been created within a fire bureau, and it really does address that critical gap that I spoke about between somebody picking up the phone and calling 911 and a responder showing up on scene. Thank you.
Thank you, Chief Matthews. Council, I'd like to welcome back Deputy Chief Mike Frome, who's going to talk about public safety support specialist and an alternative service model. Chief?
Thank you. During the break, one of my coworkers told me to lighten up. So this next section, hopefully it's going to be a little lighter. I'm pretty proud of this next program, the public safety support specialists. And I forgot on my earlier one, but the images on the screen are that of a young man wearing a polo shirt with a police bureau logo and a radio microphone out working. And the other one is a young woman wearing a public safety support specialist uniform in a laboratory setting. So the public safety support specialist program is relatively new for an agency that's been around since 1870. We hired our first PS3s in the summer of 2019, and then 9 of them began taking calls in November. We currently have 20 that are working across our 3 precincts today. The public safety support specialists, you'll hear me call them PS3s. They attend a 5-week classroom academy put on by our training division, followed by between 8 and 12 weeks with a training officer. Some of the early training is actually with a police officer, so they can become accustomed to how police officers respond to calls, and then they are finished off with training officers unique to the PS3 program. Some of the public safety support specialists we hire have prior law enforcement experience. They tend to not take as much time to train as people that come into it without any prior law enforcement experience. Our PS3s are unarmed responders who handle non-emergency calls for service. calls involving crimes in progress, disturbances, or anything with a suspect or outside their purview. They cannot make arrests or take enforcement action. There are about 30 identified call types that the PS3s can take, ranging from stolen vehicle reports to food box delivery. There are many more things they could be doing, but they have really developed into a property crime response resource for us. Between January of 2020 and October of 2021, the PS3s have taken nearly 18,000 calls for service. That's a little over 800 a month, averaged over that time frame. They did not take as many early on because there weren't as many of them, but as they have built up over time, we're seeing definite increases in what they're doing. Breakdown of those calls, 7,052 of them involve stolen cars. Another 2,200 recovered stolen cars, about 2,500 cold thefts, a little over 1,300 calls involving found or recovered property. The PS3s average about 6 calls for service per day. Every one of these calls saves officer time. If officers are needed to handle the high priority calls, PS3s are the resource to help take away those lower priority calls. Where can this PS3 program go? Well, it can go lots of places. As the city opens up and people are out in public in greater numbers, I see the PS3s being part of our community outreach and involvement efforts. I expect to have PS3s participate in summer youth camps this summer. We're working on creating a role for the PS3s within the detective division. Specifically, we've got an idea to have one assigned as a kind of a family liaison for victims of homicides in our victim services team. I see a future where we can use the PS3s as an investigative resource, helping to conduct canvasses, following up with witnesses, or helping out with crime scene response. We can have PS3s start to work the afternoon shift, making them more available to most neighborhood meetings held after traditional working hours. So what do we need? Well, we need more of them. We have 12 positions already authorized, just need permission to start filling them. We're asking for another 33 in this budget ask. With these additional PS3, we can augment patrol. We can create some expanded duty positions outside of the precincts. We can develop the program into a meaningful employment experience for people that want to be involved in law enforcement that don't necessarily want to be police officers. Our internal review, which is echoed by CBO's analysis, shows that we have enough work to support the additional PS3s. Outside of that, I think I'm going to end up a little early on this one, and just thank you for hearing me out on this one, and I'm looking forward to questions on the PS3 program.
Okay, well, thank you, Chief Fromm. Next up is the Chief Resilience Officer for Portland Bureau of Emergency Management, Jana Papa FMU, to talk about building resilient communities. Jana, welcome back.
Thank you, Director Myers. This slide shows pictures of volunteers and employees working together to set up cots in a shelter and to staff a COVID testing clinic. During the pandemic, the Bureau of Emergency Management stepped up its engagement with community-based organizations in order to provide groceries, face coverings, basic hygiene and cleaning supplies to Portland's most under-resourced communities. That engagement was transformational for PBEM and for the organizations that we served. And a group of over 90 community organizations continues to engage with the Bureau. They get a monthly meeting, a weekly newsletter, and a lot of one-on-one support to some organizations. And in exchange, they've supported other emergency response efforts. They served as trusted messengers and shared information with communities in multiple languages and cultural contexts during severe weather and smoke incidents. They've also provided volunteers and their own locations for severe weather shelters. And with our support, many of them are now developing their own efforts to engage members in disaster preparedness workshops. So PBEM is seeking ARPA funds for a limited term, 1-year position to help support these community-based organizations develop a structure and an internal framework so that they can be a self-sustaining coalition going forward. We're following a national model for coalitions of organizations active in disasters. At PBEM, we rely on community-based organizations as partners in emergency response. They amplify our work greatly, and our engagement with them helps us better serve the communities that face the greatest risks. I think this request is a tremendous return on investment. In 2021, The Bureau also worked with other public safety, planning, and infrastructure bureaus to update our mitigation action plan, which is a comprehensive strategy to reduce our risk to natural hazards over time. This plan is currently under review by the Federal Emergency Management Agency and will be back in front of Council later this spring. Meanwhile, significant federal funds are available to fund projects that are already in this plan, and we're requesting dollars to develop projects from the plan and to meet the match requirements so we can apply for these grants. This is another area where we have the opportunity to leverage a small investment to make a big difference for Portland. Finally, the pandemic and subsequent events have highlighted again for us the unique risks that people with disabilities face during all kinds of disasters. The city auditor reviewed PBEM's programs and affirmed that we need to invest more to address the needs of people with disabilities. Therefore, we are requesting one-time funds to update our outreach materials and our plans to directly address the needs of people with disabilities and comply with the Americans with Disabilities Act. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Jana. Okay, team, now I'm going to have a few minutes of comment as your Community Safety Transition Director for the Community Safety Division. And I'm going to talk about building resilient communities myself. And I want to share a story with you about community safety collaboration. And Mayor, I'm hoping that this hits to point some of the concerns that you raised or some of the thoughts that you raised in the last part of the session. Now, there are many stories to tell about how the bureaus and offices represented here today collaborate to address complex community safety problems. I'd like to tell you one story today that highlights how city partners, aside from just the 4 traditional public safety bureaus, have worked together to respond to safety issues to reduce the burden on our first responders and improve safety for our community members. The problem. In the fall of 2021, the Mount Scott area, like many neighborhoods in this city, was grappling with rapid uptick in gun violence and related high-speed traffic, further endangering community members. Response. Working in concert with local community members, the Portland Bureau of Transportation, Park and Recs, Community Safety Division, the Office of Violence Prevention, and the Portland Police Bureau worked together on a collaborative effort aiming to reduce gun violence and related vehicle speeding in the area. The Portland Bureau of Transportation placed 18 traffic calming barrels to address known dangerous driving locations. The Office of Violence Prevention collaborated with Civic Life and Parks on community engagement efforts. Parks increased park ranger patrol and repaired lighting in Mount Scott Park. The Portland Police Bureau increased patrols in the area and enhanced collaboration with park rangers. Commissioner Hardesty's office engaged residents to capture their concerns and ideas. City staff spoke with local businesses and encouraged installations of security cameras. All partners coordinated on data collection and evaluation. This approach represents an all-hands-on-deck holistic response to a complex problem that started with the input from local residents. The results? In the 3 months since the project began in October of 2021, there has been a 64% decrease in verified shootings. This decrease in shootings occurred while shootings in the rest of the city remained constant. These results are preliminary, but very promising. What we need to advance this type of collaboration. The collaboration in Mount Scott is an example of the type of collaboration that happens on community safety issues all over the city. In many cases, this collaboration happens organically as issues arise, but there is a need to systematize and specifically resource some of this collaboration as well. The Community Safety Plan pilot Community Safety Division's ARPA request, I'd like to talk about that. The Community Safety Division is requesting $3 million in ARPA funds to pilot its community safety plan in 2 additional neighborhoods. This funding would be used to engage community members and fund community-driven solutions to safety issues, such as built environment improvements and youth engagement activities, working with relevant city bureaus. The Integrated Street Safety Initiative, the Portland Bureau of Transportation's decision package, the PBOT is requesting $250,000 in cannabis tax funds to create a coordinated strategic approach to the transportation aspects of this community safety work. Half of the funding would support an ongoing FTE to build partnerships, develop location criteria, and implement on-street projects. The other half of the funds would support street safety materials and investments like traffic barrels and speed bumps. The Outer Holgate Pedestrian Safety Initiative. To strengthen community connections and reduce the need for emergency response to traffic crashes, the Portland Bureau of Transportation is requesting funds to add safer crossings, sidewalks, and median islands on this deadly high crash corridor. Improvements would be funded by a combination of general fund and cannabis tax. More park rangers, the Portland Park and Rec ARPA request. Under the leadership of Portland Park and Rec Security Manager Sophia Chavert and the Health, Safety, and Emergency Manager Vincente Harrison, who is here today with us, the Park Ranger program has made a tremendous progress in Council's investment last spring. Rangers made over 26,000 positive contacts with park goers and handled 8,000 contacts for park rule violations and nuisance issues. Rangers required Portland Police or Portland Fire involvement in only 2% of calls for park rule issues. The ARPA request from Rangers is for 6 additional Rangers to continue this work, particularly in East Portland, as well as support staffing and infrastructure improvements like fencing and gates to secure park maintenance yards. In closing, as you can see, we are doing the work to re-envision community safety and transform our system to better serve all Portlanders through changes in the way our system is organized, changes in how we respond, and innovations in how we reduce the need for response. Both acting with urgency and transformation are big tasks, and we need your support and investments to continue doing both well. The challenges we are facing both require short-term mitigation and long-term solutions and must be prioritized, as you suggested, for funding if they are to move forward with efficacy. So, Mayor, that concludes the presentation. We now have an opportunity for more questions. We are very close to being on time. We're actually a little ahead of schedule. So we have about 40 minutes. This will take us up to about 50 minutes, take us up to 5 o'clock. Mayor, would you like to facilitate these questions and answers, or would we like to handle it the way we handled it in the last round?
Oh, no, I thought you did a great job the last time. For work sessions, I usually ask the Bureau directors to facilitate.
Why don't we continue to do that then? I'll start in the opposite direction that I did last time, and we're going to take Commissioner Rubio if you'd like to start.
Thank you, Director Myers, and just thank you for that presentation. It was really exciting and inspiring to see all these great ideas actively being worked on. So I'm just very excited for what's ahead in these projects. I have a question specifically about the COAD. I'm a big supporter of that project or that program and have heard a lot of rave reviews from the community side. So this question is for Jonna. I just wanted to get a sense of, it was very successful in this last time. What do you foresee using this model in other kinds of projects or other kinds of safety related work?
Yeah, absolutely. I do. No, it's just as we're sitting here, I got an email from the East Portland Collective asking us to support their effort to open a resilience hub in East Portland and saying, would we promise to come and do some classes on earthquake preparedness? And could we help them get some portable cooling spaces to open it up as a cooling space? But I think that's an example for us of how transformational it's been just being in relationship with community-based organizations in a consistent way, that we're doing a weekly newsletter, we're doing a monthly meeting and having a lot of back and forth, that we're finding that the effort we put into doing like outreach and trainings is really amplified as they take that into their own organization and just share it in a way that feels culturally relevant. And so it's just really a force multiplier for us in terms of our, Blue Skies outreach efforts. And those are also absolutely the groups that we turn to for severe heat, for severe cold, for smoke, for what to do with debris after a storm. Like there's tons of questions that come back from the community, and just by being in relationship so that there's a person they can call that they feel like that's going to call them back, that they know, that they trust, that can help them. It's enabled us to use the resources that we have to get such better service for the community. So I'm just, as you can tell, really excited about this model, but also feeling like part of how I know that it is making a difference is that the group wants to co-lead it with us. Like it's a group that's where people are asking like, when are we meeting again, and wanting to set up a structure where the city continues to be a strong participant, but where we don't need to own it, and where they're also sharing resources and information among groups so we can be a participant and not have to always be at the center of it.
Well, that's great. Well, congratulations. It's a great model. And again, I just want to reiterate that it has very, very good credibility with community organizations. So, which is always wonderful to hear. The other question I have, really a comment and a question. First, the comment is I'm just very excited about what, all these programs coming and being braided together, and particularly with the PS3s and Portland Street response and what that will mean about differentiated response moving forward. So that's exciting to me. And so my question is, in terms of 911 and responding to calls, if we're going to ramp up 311, what happens in the reverse? Will dispatchers then direct calls that need elevated service if they discern in a 311 call that there actually needs to be a higher level? How does that work?
Michelle, do you want to? Oh, sorry, go ahead, Bob.
Sorry about that. I'm happy to at least begin answering that. When we look at integrating the 311 program, the goal from BOEC's perspective is to be able to focus on what our mission is. And the mission is answering 911 calls and dispatching help. So really, we want to be able to shift our focus back to what's in our mission, what's in our title, Bureau of Emergency Communications, and be able to focus on what we're really good at. And then Michelle and her team can then take all of the non-emergency, at least the initial touch point. My vision for the program, and I'll be very upfront, it's my vision. And, we're still working through a lot of this, but that there be two primary numbers, 911 for emergencies and 311 for everything else. And then if there needs to be some kind of dispatch, even with a non-emergency, something that is accessed by the 311 folks, that somehow there is a mechanism to transfer them to our non-emergency number, and our dispatchers can then create a call for service so we can dispatch that out.
Thank you.
And Commissioner, the only thing I would add to that is that in our work with BOEC and police and fire, we've actually thought about the public safety risk of various call types migrating to 311, so that if there are certain call types that are more likely to become that type of escalated call, we generally want the public to default to either non-emergency or more likely 911 for those types of calls rather than starting with 311.
Thank you.
Commissioner Rubio, thank you for those thoughtful questions. Commissioner Mapps, do you have any questions or thoughts?
I sure do. First, let's start with thoughts. It's really encouraging to see all this innovative work being done. I want to thank each and every one of you for literally reinventing government and saving lives. Let me start with the 311 question, which I think probably goes to Michelle. Number one, thank you. The work that 311 is doing to kind of stand up and prepare to take non-emergency calls will have a huge impact on making 911 work better. I was just wondering when we're going to begin to communicate to the public that you can call 311 to report a stolen car or whatnot.
Yes. So we have hired an outside contractor to design the education campaign and the materials. We're looking at the May-June time period to start that outreach and then kind of escalate over the summer and then through the fall, anticipating that it's likely about a 6 month push to get kind of to hit a saturation point.
I'm glad to hear that. If as I'm sure you've done, if you take a look at our 911 calls, one of the things that you see on a seasonal basis is that the volume of 911 calls tends to start to increase right about now and will increase steadily through August. So I think it's real important that we let Portlanders know that they can call 311 to report their non-emergency needs right away. Second question, actually, probably goes to Chief Fromm. Actually, I'm having a little bit of a hard time following the plot on our PS3s. So I know we have an outside evaluation of the PS3 program. Apparently, we need that in order to fill 12 positions. I was kind of surprised today to hear that we actually apparently need to have at least two independent or two different evaluations. I know that we have an internal evaluation, which I'm looking at right now, that came out on 12/27/2021. But apparently we need to have an external evaluation too. Can you, I think I didn't realize that. Can you tell me where that external evaluation is and remind me how we got there?
Yeah, we had the request that Portland Police Bureau was going to conduct a kind of an impact study or an evaluation of the program. We prepared that. There's been a request that we have it reviewed by an outside expert. That is in process. I believe by the end of the month, we are hoping to have it completed. I think that Director Myers established a work agreement with Rick Myers, who is a former chief of police in several different locations and used to be associated with the International Association of Chiefs of Police. He is taking a review on that, and we're hoping to have that very soon.
And then what's the process? Does it have to come back to, does council have to evaluate that second external evaluation and decide to move forward? I think that the second evaluation is something I don't think I even heard of.
I'll be honest, Commissioner, I'm going to feign ignorance on this one. I do not know exactly what the process would be. I would have to turn that over to maybe our friends in the budget office.
Does the budget office know the answer to that?
Thank you.
I'm happy to jump in. I actually asked for a real evaluation because what we got was a police officer's perception about how well the PS3 program was. And you may remember last year in May, when we were having a budget conversation about expanding Portland Street Response, the men on this council insisted that they have an independent evaluation before we expanded Portland Street Response. I have been around long enough to know that an internal report written by someone managing the PS3 program is not an evaluation or an audit. It is a PR piece. So I'm waiting for the evaluation so that I can use that evaluation to determine whether or not the program is doing what we want the program to do.
Well, Commissioner Hardesty, I appreciate your diligence on this matter. I still don't understand the process. Director Kennard, can you explain to us the process moving forward with the evaluations?
Right. So thanks for the question, Commissioner. The council did pass a budget note, and I can distribute the language of that budget note. It's a few paragraphs. I'm not going to read it here, asking for the evaluation and the report. And at the same time, we did put funding in contingency for a handful of these positions. And so from a budget standpoint, once council feels like the budget note, the evaluation information is sufficient, we will want to take budget action to take the money out of contingency and put it into the police bureau's budget. So that could be done during the spring bump. It could also be done by a standalone ordinance.
Okay, thank you very much. This one goes to Mike Myers. Speaking of evaluations, I'm very excited about the work being done in Mount Scott. Do we actually have a written evaluation of, it sounds like we have data on that, how that report works. Do we actually have a written report on that?
We can definitely put this into kind of a more formal report so that the council can have the same experience reading it. We can do that for you, Commissioner.
I would sure appreciate that. And my final question today goes to parks, and specifically the request for more park rangers. Everyone in Portland loves park rangers. I'm just, I think I'm a little unclear or need to be reminded of the, we have any program outcomes or associated with the ranger program? I think the one thing that got reported was the number of positive contacts. Positive contacts is great, but I'm wondering if there are any other sort of metrics associated with evaluating the success of expanding the number of park rangers we have out in the community.
Thank you for that question, Commissioner Mapps. I'm going to defer to Vicente Harrison, who is in the meeting and is the manager of that program.
Thank you, Director Long, and thank you for the question, Commissioner Mapps. My name is Vicente Harrison. My pronouns are he, him, the Health Safety Emergency Manager for Portland Parks. And the results that were in the data that was presented by Director Myers were data that was a part of the enhancement of the Park Ranger program. When we came to council about a year or so back, a part of the enhancements of the program was us being able to capture data. Since that time, we have activated a electronical system on what park rangers are doing on a daily basis to keep the data, not only positive contacts, interactions, outcome, enforcement actions. So those are reports that we can run. We have a real-time dashboard that our internal partners can see on our activities in each one of our parks. So in short, we can provide a summary report of the data in terms of the outcome of the investment from City Council and what that has resulted in terms of our engagement in our city parks.
Vicente, I'm glad to hear that. And it would be great if you could run that report. I'm sure my office would be interested in it, and I'm sure, or I can't speak for my colleagues, but at least my office is interested in it. And I think those are all my questions for now.
Thank you, Commissioner Mapps. Commissioner Ryan.
Thank you, Director Myers. Wait, first I want to start off by saying, John, I really appreciated the comments and the dialogue you had with Commissioner Rubio about what I assume you really learned so deeply at the beginning of COVID. The distance between government action and connecting with those on the ground can be a pretty long distance without those that are closer to the community. So is it really, I'm putting perhaps words in your mouth, it wasn't the COVID experience that inspired moving deeper into this investment?
I think it was, and wonderfully for us during COVID, it was the opportunity to, it was the need that drove us to really offer resources with no barriers, to say no forms, no long procurement process. Like, if you need masks, then we will give you masks today. Tell us how many you need and where we should take them. But the opportunity to just have that just a little bit, community was so grateful and so willing to then talk to us or be in dialogue with us about other needs and other efforts. And it's just, yeah, it's been transformational for us, and we've been grateful for the opportunity to continue to build that.
Okay, yeah, I mean, there's so many barriers, and language barriers being one. So it's just so important that we have those organizations with relationships to be consistently convening with the city and the county, so we don't have to rebuild a system like that when we have the inevitable emergencies that occur. So I'm very supportive of that. I wanted to pivot because we haven't talked enough about 911 and 311. So far be it for me to avoid that. First of all, what are the hours currently of 311, Michelle? And thank you for your report. What are the current hours?
We currently operate 8 to 5 Monday through Friday. Okay.
And here's what I keep thinking about with this. First of all, changing human behavior is really hard to do, or we wouldn't be where we are today. Everyone is pre-trained to dial 911. In fact, these so-called smartphones will pocket dial it when you least expect it. I'm sure that's a factor in some of the increase in calls. I'm sure we've all experienced that. How do we know that we're unsuccessful in some marketing campaign to train people to use 311? And what will we do when we notice that? I'm not projecting, I'm just saying that could be a scenario. And then, is there a technological solution when you call 911 to quickly move someone to 311? I want to hear about that. And maybe I didn't hear it earlier because I wasn't paying attention.
Yes, so we've already worked with BOEC on a few of those kind of early wins to get callers who call the public safety non-emergency line. Well, let me back up. People who call 911 tend to have called 911 appropriately. I hope Bob would agree with me that the crossover between 911 and 311 is pretty slim. The crossover between the public safety non-emergency line, 823-3333, is much more significant. So that's the line that people
that makes sense, because that's a lot of digits.
Yeah, well, that's the one they're calling with their kitchen sink of issues. Some some of which require police response, but a decent percentage, and we're looking at somewhere around 45 to 50% are simply referrals to other agencies. So what we've done so far is worked with BOEC to do two things. The first is to put an option on the phone tree that you hear when you call non-emergency that allows you as a caller to self-triage and think, hey, I don't need a police officer. I don't need fire or medical. I'm going to push this option 5 and somebody else is going to help me. And that takes a caller over to our center. The other thing we've done is installed a key on their keypad at BOEC that enables a one-touch transfer of a caller over to our center. So if a call comes through on that queue, the call taker at BOEC is realizing this really isn't a call that this is a call that's more appropriate for 311. They can easily transfer them back over.
And I can chime in a little bit here as far as the tech solution for the automatic transfer, exactly what Michelle was talking about. The focus really with 311 is impacting the non-emergency line at BOEC. And because of that, right now, honestly, I haven't looked at our data today so far, but earlier this morning, we had 45-minute waits on the non-emergency line. Now that's non-emergencies. But some of our population, because they're hesitant to call 911 for one reason or another, oftentimes some of our older population prefer to call the non-emergency number rather than bother us on 911, when in actuality, they have an emergency and they really should be calling 911. So it's those types of calls that I'm interested in being able to access much more quickly. And by callers having access to 311, hopefully that gets all of those non-emergencies out of the way, so that when people really need to reach us, whether they're calling on 911 or even the non-emergency number, there's a reason for them to contact us so we can send help. I mentioned earlier in my discussion that we're implementing case service, and case service is the phone triage for our non-emergency number. That's something that we're already doing and hope to have it up and running by the new fiscal year. Case service has the component that can be leveraged either by BOEC's non-emergency number solely, or it can become the touch point for the entire 311 program as well. And we haven't had a lot of conversations about it yet, but again, this is my vision, the way I'm envisioning it, is that when our community members call 311, that they would get that artificial intelligence component with case service. And it's smart enough to know by the questions that it asks and by the answers that are given, whether or not that caller needs to be transferred to BOEC's non-emergency number, to 311, or to other entities altogether. And it's even smart enough to give detailed information to a caller so that in some cases, a call taker either at BOEC or at the 311 program might not even have to address their issue.
Okay. So like an assessment, it's like an assessment.
It uses artificial intelligence, and from what I've seen, it's pretty uncanny. It's like speaking to a real human.
And you said 45-minute wait time right now in 311?
Right now, yeah, and that's not uncommon at all, because our focus, our primary mission is answering 911. 911 comes in and we process those calls first. So as the 911 queue is reduced and it comes down to 0, then the non-emergency numbers or lines start being answered. So if our 911 queue is full, non-emergency calls have to wait indefinitely right now.
So that's on the non-emergency line, Commissioner.
Yes.
Not at 311.
And do we have an objective evaluation on how this is all going to work with these investments? Again, I'm just training the brain to dial another number is a big deal.
So we have looked at both our planning to look at metrics, performance metrics around increasing call volumes to 311, decreasing call volumes to the non-emergency number. We can also tell if calls are being transferred between the two. So we have that data point as well. And then we'll be looking at also performance metrics for the campaign itself. How many people are seeing social media ads? How many community organizations have we sat down with in terms of the success of the education campaign?
Okay, I think I want to drill in more offline, but or with your offices. It's confusing just how complicated this is, and I would love to hear how we compare to other cities, because this sounds like it might be national as well. I have one final question, and it has to do with I don't think they are, so you need to let me know that. But some of the systems started sounding like they were duplicating one another, and I need to see how they're actually supporting one another in more like a Venn diagram. So when it was the community health division, the public health support system specialist and police, and then Portland Street Response, they started to seem to me, if I was just tuning in for the first time, like they were similar services. So I want to hear about the efficiencies of these three and how this is a learning community, perhaps. It's like convening together across the bureaus and learning from one another so we can actually be truly that efficient.
Thanks, Commissioner. I think Lisa Reslak would be the best person to give you an overview on that.
Yes, maybe we can take some time to get Lisa, Division Chief Matthews, and through Chief Boone to kind of have an off conversation with Commissioner Ryan, kind of explain how it works. We might be able to take that round to other commissioners. It is very complex, Commissioner Ryan, so you're not the only one. What Chief Boone has done is organized all of these different groupings and put a specific response tool in for each one. To me, it makes clear sense because I've been in the business for so long, but I think it is very complex, and what they're doing is very, very unique across the country. But I think maybe having some time with you to actually brief you on it would be smart. So maybe we can do that at some time in the future. Chief Boone, is that appropriate for you, or do you think you want to take some time right now?
No, I think that's appropriate, Mike, to have a more in-depth.
Thank you all. And I want you to know I appreciated all of what I heard. I just could not, I couldn't tell how they were overlapping and working together as a system. That's all. And I just want to end with a statement. I'm currently reflecting and in my feelings about something I experienced this morning. I was out on Peninsula Crossing, near the cut in North Portland, where we're looking to put a Safe Rest Village in between Willamette and Lombard. And then I also walked across Lombard. And anyone that's been out there lately knows it's grim. And what I experienced while I was there, that'll just give you the picture. And I think I'm talking to you as a Portlander that sometimes is feeling numb around our community safety at this time. So a truck barrels in onto the pathway where there's only supposed to be bikes and people in a big truck. So we all moved. And then that truck started peeling around doing cookies, almost hitting not one, but two tents where people I'm sure were sleeping, did not care. You would have thought it was like 10 o'clock at night or something. It was 9 a.m. And you stood there going, wow, I live in Portland, Oregon, and this is happening right now. And there's nothing about this that's legal, like nothing about this that's legal. So, I didn't pick up the phone and call 911. I wanted to continue to do the dialogue about how we could move forward to do construction now that there's an emergency ordinance so we can start moving things faster. But I just kept shaking my head. One, I was fortunate to not see this truck take out a tent and kill a human being. Two, it was easy to notice there were a lot of miscellaneous goods in the back of the pickup, which I'm sure were stolen. And this is what Portlanders are experiencing. It's that lawlessness that's just rampant out there at this moment. And the people who are being victimized are always innocent. And in this case, it would have been somebody that was sleeping in their tent. And I'm not trying to get you to fix it right now. I'm just saying that this session is so challenging because we have to vision and figure out how to build forward. But at this moment in time, we just keep tolerating the intolerable. Like how do you take this in and think that all of our investments in community safety are responding to this reality that's on our streets? So I know all of you feel this, it's in your hearts as well. It's just, we're all human beings that serve on this council, and we experience this as well. And we feel your frustration. And so I know we need to keep building forward, but sometimes I'm desperately looking for how are we responding to this crisis at this moment in time on our streets. So just thought
Commissioner Ryan, you're absolutely speaking the hearts and minds of your public safety chiefs and directors as well. We meet together every week, and this is the same conversation that Chief Boone will talk about. Just how do we build for the future while we're just absolutely trying to do everything we can to keep things on the rails right now. Chief Chuck Lavell's having the same issues on, how do we handle the issues that are at hand right now while trying to grow? And so these are our challenges. And, we know we need to do both. And this is at the same time that we're having, these unprecedented levels of traffic deaths, overdoses, gun violence, unsheltered, the economic changes, the inflation, it's all compounding. And that's why I'm so impressed with Director Causey and Jonna and Sarah and Mike and Chuck. I mean, they're trying to do everything they can in these current conditions to respond to just the issues you're talking about, while meet the challenges of trying, to grow to the future, to realize something different. So I appreciate the words. I'm glad that you see that and understand it, and have the will to express it. So thank you. Commissioner Mapps has his hand up, and then we're going to go to Commissioner Hardesty. We've got about 20 minutes left. I want to leave room also for the Community Advisory Board, Sho Dozono and James Parker. So I want to give them opportunities too.
My colleagues, I have to rush to get somewhere by 5 o'clock. So I see you all later. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you all for the presentations.
Thank you for the question, Commissioner Ryan. Actually, I wanted to expand on that. Let's say Commissioner Ryan had actually picked up his cell phone at that moment and called 911. Bob or Chief Fromm, can you give us a sense of what the likely public safety response would have been to that call?
Well, I can answer from the 911 perspective. Had he called, depending on what was going on, this morning we had some significant events. I'm not sure exactly how the timing would work, but he would have had to be on hold on 911. Probably for, at very least, the average, which right now is about 66 seconds. But it is at those peak times as much as 2 minutes I mentioned earlier, even under dire circumstances, 15 minutes. Probably not that long, but I would venture a guess that it probably would have been about a 2-minute wait for him to get through. And then our call taker would ask all of the pertinent questions, where the emergency is, what's happening, get description of the vehicle, find out if anyone's in danger. And it sounds like people were in danger in that case. And we would set that call up for a dispatch.
So that's a police dispatch?
Yes.
It's Chief Fromm. Do you know what, once we dispatch, we kind of transfer that call over to your shop. Do you have a sense of what the likely response would have been to that today?
I think that without going back and looking at dispatch logs for this morning, I'll just say on an average morning, that would have been set up as it would have been at least a priority. Bob, help me out. I could see that actually coming in anywhere between like a 3 and a 4 in terms of like a 1 to 7 ranking, but 4 would mean that the dispatchers would try to immediately dispatch it to a police officer because there was life safety issues. Now, if there was no one in North Precinct available, it may have held on the call board until someone freed up and was able to take it. That would be at least a 2-officer response because we would not want to go to that on our own. And then, like I said earlier, our average responses on high priority calls these days, it's at around like the 14-minute mark. So if we were busy and we hit an average response, the commissioner could have waited that long. Now, like I said, I was trying to be a little lighter. I'm hoping that someone at the police bureau would recognize who Commissioner Ryan is in the call, and maybe that would have sped things up. But that's again, that's not very comforting for the rest of the public, knowing that, but I think that's where we would have been.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Hardesty.
Once again, before I forget, I just want to tell you, this has been the most engaged work session that we've had around community safety issues in my entire time at council. And I want to thank each of you for your thoughtfulness and actually preparing ahead of time and answering our questions today. So I actually was and Michelle, thank you so much for the information on the expansion of 311. And I think you articulated something that I think is a huge city problem, right? You have a contract with someone who's developing a plan to do communication around 311. We're doing the same thing with Portland Street Response. It is stupid for us individually to be working on these plans when we all agree that we need people to call only 2 numbers, right? And so I want us to make sure, Mike, I'm putting this on you. This cannot continue to happen. We cannot have all these individual, and then I heard that the Office of Finance and Management is also doing something, right? Can we not do that? Can we have one communication plan that will tell people what to expect when they call 311 and what to expect when they call 911? And it should start with, don't call 911 for someone sleeping in a camp or someone talking to themselves, et cetera, right? Call 911 if there's a life emergency, right? Call 311 if you want to find out about services and support. So I just want to ping that, because it's going to make me batty if I see us having conflicting communications out in the street. So, and I hope, Jessica, you can help us pull all those communication pieces together so that we can develop a plan about how we're going to have one communication strategy, and we're all going to be a part of it around our first responder. I also want to say, I was concerned when Commissioner, what's his name, Ryan, made a assessment about the automobile being stolen. And a lot of times that happens when people call 911, they use their own assumptions in determining what they share with the 911 operator, which means many times the call is in an enhanced status when it doesn't have to be. Because we train the public, if you make it sound as serious as possible, you possibly will get a faster response. And so part of this, we did this, and actually the police did it, but all of us are suffering from it because it's just been a history, right? I mean, I used to go to neighborhood meetings all the time, and the police would always say, yeah, you see anything suspicious, call the police. You see people you don't know, call the police. And I'm like, I just moved into a community with 10,000 new people. How am I going to know everybody, right? So we have to re-educate the public about what's appropriate and what isn't. And we have to do it with one message, because it would make me, again, we cannot continue to do this. I will also say one of the things that didn't come across in a 40-minute conversation, the unique thing about Portland Fire and Rescue is we're developing funding streams for the new innovative programs that we've created. We are working with our congressional delegation, and I know Senator Wyden is working very closely with the Oregon Health Authority, because we don't want to be a drain on the general fund. And so we are being very creative about how we build a program, and guess what? Get other people to actually help us pay for it. The same is also true with the chat program. And so I wanted to make sure that I put that out there, because all these bureaus are general fund dependent, but only one is actually creating these partnerships where we have the opportunity to fund our operation. So I just want to make sure that we're understanding what we're building, because we have 2 new innovative programs in Portland Fire and Rescue that have rolled out, and are showing very promising results. And we'll continue to build it out. But I don't anticipate us being solely reliant on the general fund. And I hope other bureaus will start trying to be creative about how do you create the community partnership that actually other people want to pay us for doing the good work that we do. I was trying to get a total. Can somebody tell me how many calls Portland Street Response on average takes? I think somebody said they responded to 1,000 calls. Is that right? in the geographic area that they were in Lance. Is that correct?
Yeah, that was me.
Was you? All right.
Yeah, basically right now since inception, they've gone on approximately a little over 1,000 calls. I just looked today during the expansion, they've gone on 8 calls. So between chat and PSR, they're going on around 20 calls a day. And I see
And I think
Robin's
that
on
was like,
here.
did the report that the evaluations say that they were taking 5%? I can't remember what the percentage was that the that PSR was taking. Lisa, do you remember? Chief Boone?
They're taking 90% of their calls are traditionally police calls, if that helps, if that's the number you're looking
Yeah, I'm
at.
sorry. What I was trying to say is, so before PSR existed, the police would have responded to those calls. So there's a percentage of calls that the police in the area that PSR is in now that the police don't take, right? So is that, can you tell me, does anybody know the percentage of the overall calls?
Robin?
Yeah, we've taken 4.6% of police calls diverted.
Thank you. That's what I was trying to get, 4.6%. So if we think about 311 being able to absorb up to 180,000 calls for service, if we think about PSR starting to roll out citywide, right? And we'll take some percentage, let's just be conservative and say 3% of the average calls, right? We're getting 1 million calls a year, right? So if you start thinking about how we're unpacking this call system, if in fact we are building 311 to a 24-hour-a-day system, or is it 20 hours a day?
We're looking at 13 hours a day right now. I can go into details, but there appear to be diminishing returns in the evening hours.
Well, but I will say emergencies don't happen 9 to 5, Monday through Friday, right? So we have to, we're building it, right? So we're building this as we're moving. But my point is that in a year from now, we could anticipate possibly having 250,000 of those calls gone from 911 because they've been devoted to something else, right? And so again, I think what we're talking about is building for the past rather than building for the future. So we're looking at this from what is driving the work. The calls are driving the work. Why are the calls driving the work? Because half of the calls we get at 911, we should never get in the first place, right? So if we can eliminate 25% of the ones we should have never gotten in the first place and divert calls to other places that are more appropriate, then we may have the people we need. And I don't say that facetiously, but I just want us to be thinking about how these all fit together as compared to thinking about what I need in my individual bureau, because what you need in your bureau will change based on what the other things that change. Does that make sense? Right? So yeah, and this is what I've been sitting here trying to weave together, right? Because again, if the police will say, well, we need X number of people, but in fact, we're actually diverting more calls from police, then we have to do a real assessment of how many police do we really need, right? And what is the new job for police in our community? The same with PSR. And Portland Street Response is actually taking more types of calls, right? What else do we need? And I think what we're the way it feels like we're budgeting, it was budgeting for everything we've before, and then we're building new stuff as well. And we can't do them both. We got to do one or the other, right? And we have to stabilize where we are while we're building the new stuff. So anyway, so no question there, but I was just like, as I'm listening to all of this, I say it's really compelling, but I also want to make sure that as we're adding money, we're not adding money for the vision of yesterday, that we're actually adding money that moves us into another direction so that we will need less money as we move forward in the future. So that's kind of where I am.
Yep. Loud and clear. Yeah, and I think that's been the directive you've given me to do that. And I appreciate you bringing some of these things to our attention and keeping us focused on what the real intention was, and that is building higher productivity, better efficiencies by realigning and collaborating our services. So, that is still the intention. I see some good starting work, but like you said, as we're moving through this, I feel like we're going to gain momentum and continue to do better and better work. And every time we come back to you, I want you to see better progress toward that. So you have that commitment to keep moving in that direction, Commissioner. And thank you for those comments. We have about 7 minutes left, Commissioner. Is it okay to move on to the Are you okay? Thank you so much for those words and to keeping us on point. I'd like to make sure that Mr. Dozono and Mr. Parker, if you are still here and you have any questions, that we give you time for that. The mayor has his hand raised, and we want to make sure that he has time. And we only have 6 minutes left. Any short comments? Is there anything that you need answered? See anything? Okay, thank you both so much for being here and listening attentively. I know some of this is very heady stuff, so I appreciate your attention to all of this. Mayor, if you would like to take the last few minutes, I'd like to for Director Kennard to have just 1 minute to close.
I won't take a few minutes. I'm just going to underscore the point I made during the last section. We started this with how to increase the capacity for calls in BOIC because our call response time is unacceptable. And we all agree, and I strongly support that effort. But we have to keep thinking up through the food chain. If you have more call takers taking calls more quickly, that means they're going to be referring more calls to the police, to PSR, to fire, to other first responders. And my question is, are we aligning increased capacity in those areas with the capacity for calls? It does nobody any good if the phone is picked up immediately, they get somebody who's on the spot, ready to send somebody there, and they're standing there for an hour because there's no first responders available to respond, or it's just not the highest priority at that particular moment. So I want to make sure, and Mike, you know this, as do all of your bureau directors, part of the reason we impaneled you as a team is to help us think systematically about how we budget as opposed to doing it program by program. And we all know that this form of government leads commissioners to the position of supporting their programs in their bureaus without necessarily thinking about the system in full. And so I want to make sure that you, in your capacity as you're presenting budgets to this council, think about the system as a whole. Second thing I want to get to is outcomes. I'm really not interested in the McDonald's model, how many people are served. I don't care how many people are served. I really care more about the outcomes and the resolution. So I don't care how many burgers you serve. I just want to know, do they taste great? And that's my only stupid analogy for the day, but frankly, it's the quickest way to explain what I'm talking about. I care about outcomes. How are we actually improving the results in the community through objective, measurable standards? Last, the city, as part of my rant, is taking on more and more of upstream solutions. We are becoming the de facto grant maker for the city of Portland. We are becoming the de facto supporter of first, middle, and last resort for a lot of nonprofits that do social services in this community. We are increasingly taking on social service roles that historically the county took on. And I know that because I used to run the county. That used to be the purview of the county, and now it's becoming the purview of the city. But at the same time, the basic services that we're supposed to support around fire, around transportation, around other services continue to wither as we keep increasing the percentage of our budget going towards social services. Finally, we have to advocate as much as possible with one vote. I know this isn't the OGR session today, but there are upstream solutions, whether it's shelter, whether it's mental health, whether it's domestic violence, that are not at capacity. And as a result of them not being at capacity, the problems end up filtering onto the street and people call 911. And so this is a vicious circle, not necessarily caused individually by the city of Portland, but once something hits the street because all the other safety nets either aren't there or they've fallen through, then it becomes our problem. But without the upstream solutions, we're not really solving the problem. We're just answering more calls and sending more cops and sending more street response people, but we're not really addressing the underlying problems. And that is deeply concerning to me because I believe that the merry-go-round we are on right now, with increased homelessness, with increased violence, with increased drug addiction, with increased mental health issues, we can't get off this merry-go-round with the resources we have at our disposal at the City of Portland without those upstream interventions being in place. And we have to demand that state government does its part around mental health and around substance abuse, that we work more collaboratively with our county partners on their investments in these areas, and domestic violence and other areas. Otherwise, I just fear the budget scenario for the City of Portland is going to get more and more dire, and our public is going to get angrier and angrier because they're not going to see the kinds of outcomes we need to see on the streets. Sorry, another lecture. But that's the frame through which I'm thinking about this budget. This has to be a time of transformation, because guess what? We're not going back to the way things were. We're not. I'm fundamentally convinced of that. And so the question is Portland government set up to deal with the new realities that we are facing in our community? And do we have the right partnerships? Are we coordinated well with those upstream solutions and with other jurisdictions in order to be able to address these problems? And I think the answer is no. That's my personal opinion, but I want to finish on a hopeful note. This council gave you all, as our first responder leaders, the important responsibility of helping us figure out how to rationalize our first responder and public safety system. And I think you guys are off to a great start. And I want to underscore that. Lots of work to do. You're off to a great start, and I appreciate it. And now I will shut up and I will go away.
No need to go away, Mayor. We appreciate your comments, and I know they resonate with us. We've been having the same conversation. So we want you to have confidence in us that we understand those orders and those directions, and we are working on it. We've been at it for about 11 months now. I'm hoping that you see, where we're headed. My expectation is that only gets better. Director Kennard, thank you for hosting us today. I'll turn it over to you.
Sure.
I'm sorry. Excuse me, Director. I know he's going to turn it over to you to tell next steps on the budget. But before we do that, I just want to applaud Mike Myers. Mike, most people that we hired a year ago and then kept changing your job as you were learning the job that we hired you to do, and then kept adding more to your plate, would have walked out of the door screaming and yelling and saying bad things to us. I want to applaud you publicly because you are consistently calm, deliberative, and you listen deeply to the concerns of everyone that you talk to. I worry about you, and I hope the other directors will remind Mike to take vacations and to take time off, because he's not in my portfolio anymore, but I make him do that. But I could not leave this meeting without telling you how much I appreciate the incredible work you've done. And the fact that you haven't left when we keep piling more things on top of you. The job we hired you to do was big enough. And what you're doing today is 3 times what we hired you to do. So thank you, thank you, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Commissioner. Director Kennard.
Yes, thank you. And I want to extend my gratitude as well to Director Myers and all of the remarkable leaders and directors on this call. That was I agree with Commissioner Hardesty. That was one of the best work sessions, budget work sessions I feel like I've been part of. So I'm grateful for that. I will see you all again on Monday at 1 p.m., where we will reconvene to talk about the impacts and the opportunities of returning tax increment financing resources. So have a good weekend. We'll see you all in a few days.
Thank you, everybody. We're adjourned.